Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself in the committee of the whole to consider only the budget bill, House Bill number 1.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Representatives Wanitzer, Dan.
All right, Committee of the Whole come to order. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 1, popularly known as the Budget Bill. And I'm just guessing the Chairman of Appropriations might have some initial comments of this year before we get into the section. So with that, Chairman Nicholas.
So not all of you are probably totally enthused about the next 3 or 4 hours of the day because it's a little bit redundant. It's a little bit, it's just a lot of information, but as we welcome your questions as we walk through these agencies. You're more than welcome as we go through an agency, get up and ask questions. We're kind of hogging the 2 mics, but we'd be happy to get out of your way as we proceed. And as you know, basically, I want to explain a little bit about the process. So you know what we, the House of Appropriations, have been doing since the beginning of December. We spent about 10 days, a little bit more than that, in December and another week in January, basically reviewing this document. This is the governor's supplemental budget bill, 700 plus some odd pages. Every agency that is talked about in there came before us. We took testimony from those agencies with our good friends down the hall. And from that, you got this 106-page document, which is our supplemental budget. And mine's a little bit larger, so I can read it easier than yours. But that's the process that we've been through. And in addition to that, we did 3 other bills. We did the ARPA bill, which you'll be seeing shortly. We did the local government bill, very simple bill. That's where we add or subtract to the $105 million that goes out to local governments. And then we do a CAPCON bill. And so that will be coming out. The CAPCON bill started down the hall, and so we won't see that for another week or 2. And so all those things culminated in our supplemental budget that we're going to go through now. So let me tell you a little bit about if I'm too loud or too soft, please give me the signal, because every mic's different, and every voice is different. And so as you all know, the House Appropriations has 7 members to it. The Senate Appropriations Committee has 5 members in it. And to pass each one of these 4 bills that I just talked to you about, it takes a majority of both sides. And so what that means is that ultimately what comes out of your joint appropriation committee is a compromise, at least on various issues. And so when we're voting on an individual amendment to the budget bill, if 7 House members want it and 5 other side does not, then we prevail, because on that particular amendment, we have a majority vote. And so that's turned into, over the past probably 6 or 7 years, a little bit of a conflict between the 2 bodies. And as a result of that conflict, what has happened in the past is down the hall, they'll bring the first amendment to the supplemental budget, will be kind of like a large one-time hits all budget that reverses all the actions of the House that they consider to be a cram down or a 7-5 decision. And so boom, you go right back to an even playing field when you're working through the supplemental budget. So in order to avoid that, this time, we worked, not all the time, but I would say more than a majority of the time, we compromised with our friends on the 5 versus 7 to reach a middle, so that then on some of them, we would come back in and try to increase the dollars up or down, and they would do likewise. And so you will see as we walk through this, and when we get to the amendments, there will be times when it could be a member of this committee has an amendment. And when that happens, that's basically we're going, okay, now that we're on the floor, we're going back to the original House position, and this was the position before we reached a compromise. A perfect example of that is the ECA on education funding. What's in this budget bill was not the position of the House. It was a compromise position that we reached between the bodies. So, and we'll kind of alert you to that as we continue to walk through that. So that's the bit of the process. What we're going to do is we're going to go through every agency that we amended, and that's in your summary sheet. So most of us, and even me, this is what I'll use unless you have questions when we take a little deeper dive on what we did. And we'll go through each agency, and we pass that around between the different members of our committee. So you'll see everybody popping up and walking through it. That wasn't the way it was in the past. Just before I arrived in the legislature, one person would get up and read the entire budget, all the amendments. And that was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And frankly, the other members didn't quite know even what it said. It was just a different world for a long time. And when I first came into the Appropriations Committee, into the legislature, there wasn't a small sheet like this. And you worked the bill into this session, and so it wouldn't come out and you wouldn't see it until the day before we came to the floor. So we've intentionally sped up the process so we could kick out the budget bill and the supplemental budget bill, so all of you have more time to read it, understand it, ask questions about it, make amendments to it, and more people understand what we're doing and why, and have more impact or influence on it. So we hope that that's the case, and then we can always improve, but that's the process we have now. So now let me dive into what we've done a little bit.
And so to end that point of personal privilege, we'll have the reading clerk read House Bill 1 and then turn it over.
And then I'll talk about it.
House Bill 1, sponsored by Appropriations, General Government Appropriations, an act relating to supplemental appropriations for the operation of state government for the fiscal biennium commencing July 1st, 2022, and ending June 30th, 2024.
All right, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Let's start with Section 1. Chairman Nicholas.
So I would move for the introduction of the budget bill, and I'm going to do a kind of quick synopsis of what this bill does, so everyone kind of understands the format and where we're going. And then once that happens, after that, we'll go and we'll start working agency by agency. So why a supplemental budget bill? There's lots of different reasons, but just to name a few, lots of things can happen between this year and last year. And in this particular situation, lots of things have happened. This is the first time since I've been in here, 13 years basically, where we have a $1.76 billion surplus. This hasn't happened since probably 2004, 2005. And then it hadn't happened in probably 25 years. So it's a unique time, it's a unique place. So part of our function as a legislature is determine what to do with these surpluses, where they go. Do they go to savings? Do they go to medium-term or one-time projects? Do they take care of issues that we've had in the past? Just for an example, since I've been on appropriations, we've cut 555 positions out of state government. We cut over $500 million in the costs of ongoing government. I think in 2010, right before that particular crash, our budget was $3.6 billion. This budget that we're working on now is 2.8. It ebbs and flows with the dollars that we have and how much we save and what we believe is responsible uses of our dollars. I think it's also important to realize, where did this $1.76 billion come from? So if you look at on the general fund side, 72% of it came from mineral severance taxes and federal and FMRs. So 72%. That's our extractive industries. So we can owe almost all of this. And the other part, 19% sales and use tax, and then 9% other. So almost all of it is our extractive industries. And the question then obviously is, well, how long is that going to survive? And what do we do to prepare ourselves for the future? And if you look on the school side, it's even more. It's 47% was the mineral property taxes and 20% on FMRs. And on the like the residential property taxes, everyone was saying it was, a hardship on our folks, but that's only 18% of the added dollars to that $850 million surplus that we have on the education side. So what does this bill do? On the general fund side, we appropriate $492 million. This is comprised of $51 million putting into reserve savings accounts for Wyoming's Tomorrow Wildlife Cultural Trust Fund. That's changed a little bit with bills that have come out there, but that's what the budget bill does. Then one of the major items that we put into this supplemental budget. So this House Bill 89 has passed this floor and has gone to the Appropriations Committee and now is back on the floor. And so that will come up and we'll be discussing what happens again and debating what's in House Bill 89. You may recall that this is where we increased the size of the reserve accounts. Well, the total appropriation to increase the size of those 4 reserve accounts is $639 million. So we also do that in the budget. So why do you do that in the budget? There's various reasons to do it, but the most importantly, if House Bill 89 does not survive, for whatever reason, from this body or down there, we're saying this is the policy of the legislature. This is how we want to save these funds, and we think it's the most expeditious to use these funds in this way. And of that $639 million, $359 million or $360 million is just on the education side. And that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck because of the way we fund education. It has a smaller permanent fund. It does not have a regular long-term feed into it like the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund does, where we put in 1.5% of all of our mineral income. It just doesn't have it, and so we have to feed it. It doesn't grow as fast. And because of that, we have a larger spending policy that's not guaranteed on the school side, we have to have a larger reserve account to cover the risks of a downfall. And so that $359 million increases the reserve accounts for the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund accounts to protect us. We start off at 5 times earnings, and then we go up to 7 times over the course of time, like we do in House Bill 89. And we won't go into too much debate on that because we've already debated it. But that's why it's in the budget bill. So then, what's the difference between what we did and what was recommended by the chief executive? The chief executive added 23 positions in his supplemental budget. Your appropriations dropped that 6, so that has about 17 new positions. Most of those new positions are in revenue to raise funds, DEQ to help us further our extractive mineral industries and in the energy-related areas. And so we'll walk through what those are. So one of the things that's out there is typically we have federal government dollars that come in, and a certain percentage of that we have to hold in reserve as we implement those federal policies or funds or processes. Because of the COVID dollars that we receive, that's an unusually high number. So at the end of 2024, we're going to have basically $160 extra million that would otherwise flow into our general fund account. And so in this bill, we appropriate that $160 million. And this was with a joint appropriations decision to put it into basically, this is a fund we created through ARPA dollars that allows the chief executive to go to large projects and large project developments to bring in those projects to our state, hydrogen hub and natrium, all those type of things that we're trying to accomplish. You'll see a House amendment, a modification to that's going to suggest that instead of putting up there in the governor's hands to play with, that perhaps that might be a good place to actually take the 160 million and put it into our permanent funds. So what we didn't do is the governor's rec, and the governor's rec was to put $412 million into the permanent funds. So your House will come back with 160 million versus the 412. And the reason, once again, we did that is because, as recommended by our investment professionals, it's a better idea to make our reserve accounts earn money for us. Our reserve accounts now earn anywhere between 1 to 1.5%. If we can invest those funds in a long-term return, that will be that'll change to 5 to 6%. The difference is, and we talked about this, if you look at the past 5 years, we'd have well over additional $500 million sitting in our accounts that we could save or spend on one-time dollars for our industry or whatever. What is it? So that's why we did not follow the Gov's rec on that $412 million into the permanent fund and the 248 in the common schools account. So let's talk a little bit about just other things that we did in this budget. The ECA, this budget has $43 million for the ECA. There'll be a floor amendment from your committee to bring that back up to the recommendation. We do that for lots of different reasons. Frankly, we've been putting off the ECA from one fashion or another, either one-time funding or cutting it, almost every year since I've been for 8 years since I've been on appropriations. And because we have the funds, particularly now, by the way, that $850 million surplus in the school side, and that will go to the program account, is the highest it's ever been since 2000, right? And well before that. It's never been that significant. Even when we created the Hathaway Scholarship back in 2005, it didn't have that type of money in it. Most of that money came, it didn't have this kind of money. And if you look at our long-term forecast from our Craig, we're expecting something comparable to that number in the next biennium and the next biennium. And you may recall that, as we discussed last week, the dollars that are strictly for education are different than other dollars. They have to be used for education. And not only can they not have to be used for education, but they can't, not all those dollars, only a small percentage really, can be used to put into the Common Schools permanent trust account. So we have to do something else with them. And so based upon those restrictions and the number of dollars that we have coming, this is our recommendation to you. So let's go back in time a little bit, just to understand where we were 3 years ago. So in March of 2020, after we passed the budget that came out of this body, the supplemental budget, no, it was the budget. We had a surplus of $41 million in our BRA and general fund, but we had a $202 million deficit on the school side. And we knew we had it, but frankly, at that time, we didn't have the money. And so that's what we did. Then immediately after COVID, Craig came out, and our deficits absolutely ballooned. They went to, on the general fund side, to $877 million deficit. In other words, we couldn't afford our existing budget. So we had to come in a special session and change it. And there was a $515 million deficit on the school side. So we came in, the legislature plus the executive branch, we cut 15% out of every agency budget except one or two, literally. And that was, we called them step 1, step 2, and there were step 3 cuts. We had no choice because we have to have balanced budgets, and we had to make it all work. So fast forward to the next year. After we made those cuts, on January of 21, we had balanced the budget again with all the cuts that were put in place. We were still $300 million short on the school side. And so to cover those shortages, by the way, we just take money from wherever we can get to do major maintenance for schools, to put CapCon dollars into the schools, and frankly, not to do a lot of capital construction for the schools. And so we just find the money to cover our base budget, to do what we can do. Then, literally, a year later, actually a year and 18 months later, we have last October, and we have this $1.76 billion surplus. So what does that tell you? It tells you the perfect example of the volatility of our funding model and our reliance on our extractive industries. And it's the reason why we think that our reserve accounts need to be 5% to 7%, and why we need to save a majority of these new dollars to help pay for programs, ongoing programs, and for one-time expenditures and CapCon, because what we have to continue to prepare ourselves for tomorrow, and to eventually supplant a lot of the income that we have out of our extractive industries. So running briefly through what you're going to see, you'll see $50 million in matching funds for energy process, $48 million for a year for pay raises for our state employees. So on the pay raise component, I think you probably all are versed in this. But for many years, there were no pay raises, and any pay raises we had were gobbled up by inflation, or they had to do contributions when we gave pay raises. Because of the price of insurance, we would then have to take money out of insurance and also for their retirement and the cost of those retirements. And so we would give them a pay raise, but then we would take that pay raise and we'd fix their insurance and their retirement. Well, and now with last year and this year, if everything passes through, it will be a combined roughly 16% pay raise, which is the largest and really about the only pay raise in over eight and a half years. And we'll still only near 90% of the mean or less on most of the state employees. Then you'll see the $40 million we've talked about for Wyoming's Tomorrow. There's $38 million for the Department of Health. Most of these increases that you're going to see in the Department of Health are from two locations. They're from the step 2 cuts that I talked about earlier that we had to take out, because when you have to cut $500 million out of the budget, our general fund biggest side is health, and so it's the 80% rule. You got to take it out of where your money is located. And so we're putting $38 million back for those step 2 cuts, and also rebasing. On certain components, we have to rebase every so many years. Just you take long-term disability, you got to rebase it based upon inflation, and so that's what those dollars are going to be there for. There's $36 million one time for UW for School of Energy Resources, Oil Research, Tier 1 Engineering, Science Initiative, and Advanced Research Computing. Those were kind of the components of UW that our beliefs matched up with our friends down the hall. There's a $14 million increase it just has to do with utilities, travel, food, and healthcare costs for all agencies throughout the state. It's kind of an en masse. This is the number that it is. And an $8.7 million increase in major maintenance because of inflationary costs in major maintenance. So out of all this appropriations that we were presenting to you, 82% are one-time expenditures, or going to do, so they're not recurring in the next budget. And we do that on purpose for the reasons that I just talked about, because we have to prepare for the future, and what we don't want to do is saddle future legislators with things we can't afford. And then 6% are the same money that continues, and 13%, roughly $90 million, biannualizes to $180 million, just because you kind of need to know what we're doing and where we're going to land. And if you go, you can look at your goldenrod, but after we do how the Appropriations Committee does what they do, we sit down with our fiscal folks and say, okay, tell us what the long-term impact of what this does is. So if we adopt everything that's in this budget, including an ECA of 70 million, not the 43, in the next biennium, we'll still have a balanced budget, and education will have an excess of 300 or 400 million. And then, so that will be 25, 26. 27 and 28, we will have a balanced budget. And that we'll have excess money on education. And in 29, we will probably have a balanced budget, or we only usually go out about 1 year, not the full biennium. And education will be balanced as well. But the problem is, on the education side, we top off and then we start going down after that. On the general fund side, the trajectory is at least even, if not rising. And so the education side, even after what we do today and through this budget in this session, we'll still need work in the long term, and we'll just continue to work on it. But so that's my presentation for introductions. Now, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move to, and I will introduce to you and explain section 1, which is on page 5 of your of the budget, supplemental budget, and on the first top page of your summary sheet. And you could look down, halfway down, you'll see the actions that were taken in this budget. The first one is we adopted the Gov's Rec of $25,000 one time for the State Employee Idea Festival. Next, the number 2, we adopted the Governor's Rec of $26,000 for the annual dues for the Education Commission of the states, but we transferred that over to the Department of Education to have the money in that department and have them pay that fee. Well, we've heard a few complaints about that action, and so that there's probably going to be a House Appropriations amendment that puts that back, just to give you guys forewarning. Number 3, we denied the Gov's Rec of $525,000 one time for special contingency funds, but we did add authority to use the $525,000 to come out of special revenues contingency account. You'll see that in your budget request on page 26. So we addressed that issue, we believe, for his concerns. And finally, in the Chief Executive's branch, we adopted the Gov's Rec, which is letter number 10, which is $1.5 million to address invasive species in the Wyoming, but we moved the appropriations to the Wyoming Wildlife Resource Trust to be dispersed. So that's our actions with the Chief Executive's office. Next, we went, we'll go down to agency number 4.
Do you want me to check if there's any questions on section 1?
Absolutely. Yeah, any questions on that? Please come up. You can kind of fill the mics if you see this coming up, or when your agency comes up that you have questions for. So moving on,
Seeing no questions, we'll move on to section. You do have a question. We'll give you just a second, Chairman Newsom. And members, if anyone else has any questions on section 1, which is a Chief Executive's office or the Governor's office, now would be the appropriate time for the next day and a half to ask them. So with that, Chairman Newsom.
we might have to get a roving
Thank you.
mic for our.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have a question about the appropriation for invasive species and why that went to Natural Resources Trust instead of to Game and Fish. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Go ahead.
What we heard in the presentation from the executive branch is that they wanted that money, particularly for aquatic invasive species and others. They wanted to be nimble and to be able to respond as quickly as possible. The Wildlife Trust Fund has been doing that and has been responding to these type of invasive issues for a long time, and felt that in visiting with them, they felt very comfortable in handling that and working, as you're well aware of, Madam Chairman, with other agencies and other, both federally and state and privately, to do that. And so we just felt that that was the appropriation was appropriate and it's needed. We just felt that that was the most responsive place to put it.
And I believe.
Go ahead, Chairman Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the total amount is spent per biennium on invasive species exceeds $5 million, if you take in the game and fish and other sources. And this has been a particular issue that our chief executive has been keen on. And so the amount we've spent has gone up to close to $6 to $7 million per biennium to address this issue.
Further discussion on section 1. Seeing none, we'll close section 1 and open section 4.
Thank you, and I would move to explain Section 4 of the State Treasurer's Office. Ladies and gentlemen, all we did in the State Treasurer's Office, consistent with a letter request from the State Treasurer, is we appropriated $41,000 general fund and $43,000 special revenue for salary adjustments for the newly reclassified attorney's position. So as that office gets more complicated in its internal investments, the expertise needed from their attorneys to review the contracts that they have with various entities has increased substantially. And it requires someone with a 10 to 15 years experience in this particular area. And that's not an easy individual to come by. So we'd move you for favorable consideration with that.
Questions on Section 4? Seeing none, we'll close Section 4 and move on to Section 6, A and I.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move for explanation, section number 6, A and I, so administration and information. And it looks like a lot of issues that happened here, but they're actually, most of them are fairly simple. And before I read the first one, I can tell you that there is a floor amendment to direct this. This particular amendment did not come from this side of your Appropriations Committee. And this was to add $5,000 for a one-time footnote to require a survey of state employees working in Cheyenne regarding whether they would consider relocating to another town in Wyoming. And so that amendment will be on its way. Next, your Appropriations Committee adopted the Gov's rec of $3,000 general fund to maintain increases in the state's SARA account, which is a State Accounts Receivable Application Billing System. So that's just an increase in fees. Next, your JAC increased the Gov's rec of $4.5 million general fund by $2 million in general fund for a total amount of $6.5 million for the insurance premium and program costs. So what this is, ladies and gentlemen, we are self-insured. And as part of that self-insurance program, we typically maintain a balance of anywhere between 30 to 50 million in this account. So when it was presented to us in December, there had been quite a few demands on this account, and the trajectory on the account over time, over the last 3 or 4 years, was declining. And so all this was and so then when we had the director of A&I present to us, we emphasized that this needs better funding, which will result in probably some legislative changes or increases on where, our contribution into this account. But this is to shore up the account, and this basically takes it it's currently about roughly 21 million, and this takes it up to about 27.5 million. So then number 4, the JC adopted the Gov's rec of $2.4 million for the restoration of the 21 Step 2 cuts for the existing leasing obligation programs. So when we did our Step 2 cuts, the A&I came to us and they estimated, this is back in 2021, they estimated that they could save roughly $6.5 million by modifying their leases and moving state agencies back into state buildings and kind of condensing and reorganizing. Well, they came back to us and explained to us that they were successful for most of it, approximately $4 million of savings, but the remainder that they calculated, basically there either was not enough space or the spaces available are not sufficient to move other agencies into what's there, and so those will just be leased out for other purposes. And so that's how that restoration came back in, because we approved the $6.5 million, and in fact, now that's numbers down to $4.5 million. So then going to number 5, your House Joint Appropriations denied Gov's rec of $1 million for the Capitol Complex security guards. They wanted, Capitol Complex, by the way, are all the buildings in this vicinity. So it's got Emerson and the parking area and the museum and Hathaway building and all of those. And so basically this was to put personnel a guard in every building, and into Hirschler and the Hirschler East and here. And we said, what we really want to see is a statewide plan on how we intend to have secure all our buildings. And particularly, for example, if you go into Hirschler East, you don't know which door you're going in. The guard was in the hallway, and so wasn't seeing even people coming in and out of the buildings. We said, we need to see a plan, and then come back and let's talk about what we need to do and how we're going to do it. So then, after that, we're down to number 6. We adopted the Gov's rec of $136,000, of which 58 is one time for the Thayer Thompson Building security guards in that building, because those are needed immediately. You'll see several other Thayer Thompson things here. So we just built and finished building the Thayer Thompson building. By the way, that building came in about $4 million under budget, which is nice to see for government buildings. I think the original cost was around $46 million, and we came in and it cost $42 to do it. It's a beautiful building, and we have lots of our committee meetings in it. But we had not we built the buildings, but we hadn't accommodated all the needs and ongoing expenses of it. And so that's partly of what we do in this supplemental budget. And we allow a flexibility. Let's go to number 7. We decreased the Gov's rec of $1.5 million by $870,000 general fund and $1.4 general fund, of which $138,000 is one time. These are 6 full-time equivalent positions for full-time equivalent positions, and we reduced that down to 5 full-time equivalent positions and added footnote 2 that gave them flexibility on 100 versus 900, meaning if it's cheaper to have snow removal at the Thayer Thompson building through contract than hiring someone, we want them to do it. We want them to do it the most economical way. But it does need people, grounds people and operations people for that building. It's a good size building. Then on your recommendation number 8, we adopted the Gov's rec of $356,000 for all the utilities for the Thayer Thompson building, and those numbers came up after we got actual numbers as close as we could as possible. Number 9, we added $350,000 general fund with a footnote that they're only effective. This is for the state capital, and so if you come to this town, particularly in the summer, on a Saturday or Sunday, the doors are locked. You know, this is our most magnificent building that the state possesses, and it's an active museum. And the idea that we don't allow folks to be here and to tour this building and residents on the weekends, we said that's not the purpose. We just spent $300+ odd million renovating and updating this building, and yet we locked the doors for people to come and walk through it. So that's what those dollars are for. Then finally, number 10, we adopted the Gov's rec of it's a reduction of $803,000. This is eliminating positions when we did the human resources consolidation, moving on human resources from all agencies back into the Department of A&I, Arts, A&I, so that, and they said, yeah, okay, thank you for that, and we're actually saving money by doing it. So I'd be happy to entertain questions on the actions of the JAC.
Chairman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to your first comment about the survey of state employees in Cheyenne to determine whether they would be interested in leaving Cheyenne or relocating to another city that is not the city from which I come from, where we just opened a new state office building. And it also had comments in there about would they be more inclined to move if the state picked up their moving expenses? So 2-part question. Is this for a new building yet to be constructed in that other community? And what's the rationale behind it? Are we short on office space for these employees, so we're trying to move them to another community? A little more information about what's going on with that.
Chairman Nicholas. How about the representative from Fremont County, Vice Chairman Larson?
You'll see in the CapCon bill an appropriation for $34 million to build a new state office building in the center part of the state in the county that I'm from. And that was a proposal from the Senate. It's been an idea that has been out there for a while. As part of that, they says we would like to, the Senate said we would also like to have a study to look and see, is there agencies or are there employees who live in other parts of the state that would be willing to relocate to that part of the state? The question that the good judicial chairman asked regarding, is there a need for that in that state? What we have found is that the Thyra-Thompson building has been very successful in bringing agencies in one area in for access by the public. Do we have a need to relocate agencies from Cheyenne to another county? Probably not. But is there a need in that part of the state with the number of state agencies to consolidate them into one office building? That's the idea behind this. You'll see in the CapCon bill that there's not a place, there's not a floor plan. It's just parking money because we have it. We need to do a phase 1 and a phase 2. So there was a significant amount of pushback from the House side on the study, on the need for it, but that's the history and the rationale behind it, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. And to respond also to that question, what we did once the request for this building showed up at our door, we said, well, great, we don't want to say no, but first thing we want to do is do a step 1, step 2 committee, which has legislators on it. And this is similar to what we did for the one in Casper, that will go in, we'll evaluate the number of employees, where they're not currently housed, if we can save money, if we can buy a building or if refurbish a building, and what the true need is, and come back with a report next year. So we kind of put some sideboards on it so that when that, instead of just funding it and taking off, that there's a process.
Any other discussion on A&I? Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you talked about savings on the construction budget for the Thyra-Thompson building of like $4 million. I'm curious what happened to that funds, and as part of the budget for the project, was there anything included for the ongoing operations and maintenance of that building? Thanks.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you. And the answer to that is we've taken care of in the budget through A&I, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Through the budget, we take care of the ongoing operation and maintenance through A&A for that new office building. The reversions you'll see take place in the CapCon bill back to the State Construction Department in their contingency fund to address contingency items in some of these other projects. But it'll be in that bill.
Any further discussion on section 6? Chairman Nicholas?
I see someone moving towards the mic.
Chairman Washut, welcome back.
Thank you. Just one more quick section. There was a reference to section 307, and when I went in the back of my budget bill to the 300 section, it went from section 300 to section 308. What exactly is the 307?
Representative Zwanitz, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Remember, this is a supplemental budget, and if you go back to your original budget bill, and so you can go back on the internet and look at the 2022 budget session, and I think if you hit about page 114, you'll find section 307 there. And 306, I believe, is just that mechanism for personnel services not to be used for contract services or vice versa. There's a couple exceptions for some agencies in that one.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Just a hair more detail on that. When we appropriate money to be used for in Series 100, that's salaries, that's FT, full-time employees. 900 is contract services. So at some of the facilities like in corrections, when we will sometimes allow them flexibility if they can't hire full-time security personnel, that they can contract that out. And we allow them some super flex then that says at a later date, if they're able to hire or maybe even hire these, they can take the funds and transfer it from a 900 up to 100. But in that section 307, we prohibit that unless that super flex is granted.
Any other questions?
I think that's my line. Any other questions on section 6? Seeing none, we'll close section 6 and open section 7, Military Department. Representative Zwanitz, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the explanation on section 007, the Military Department, you can find that on page 17 of your budget bill, or you can look on page 3 of your summary sheet. You'll notice there's 5 different items listed there. So if you look at the first note on the summary sheet, the JAC decreased the governor's recommendation to add $172,500 for military recruitment, and we took that down to half. So we're still allowing $86,250 for those recruitment needs. JAC also added footnote number 5, located on page 18 of your budget bill, stating that the military department shall contact and work with the University of Wyoming in developing marketing strategies. If you go down to the second item, JAC did adopt the governor's recommendation to add $275,000 in general funds for the Wyoming National Guard Education Assistance Plan. This amount asked for by the governor for the military department came about due to the increased cost for tuition and fee benefits needed to support over 400 National Guard students who plan on entering and continuing degree programs with in-state institutions during the next biennium. And this increase came about basically due to the COVID-19 impacts. If you go down to number 3 note, JAC reduced the governor's rec by $800,000 for routine facilities and projects and eliminated footnote number 2 for the Air National Guard. And at the same time added back $800,000 to the Army National Guard for routine facilities projects, along with amending footnote number 3 on page 19 to show the transfer of those funds. If you go down to number 4, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation, which allows the department the ability to move funds, as we were just talking about, from the 100 series, which is personnel service, to the 900 series, which is contract services, for the Wyoming Cowboy Challenge Academy, and added footnote number 6 on page 20 of your budget bill. A little explanation for this is when the Wyoming Cowboy Challenge program closed, several cadets wanted to complete the program and thus were moved to facilities in other states. And finally, on number 5, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation to add $45,685 to reestablish the general funds for the Civil Air Patrol. This will allow for minimal funding for maintaining 5 aircraft for a proper level of response for Wyoming emergencies. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any questions the body may have.
All right. Any questions regarding section 7, Military Department? Nobody looks like they're going to the microphone. So we'll close sections. Representative Vice Chairman Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had one question on the marketing as to why you shall use the University of Wyoming instead of may.
Representative Zwanitz, sir.
The last part of your question says why the university, what were the last 3 words? Why the university?
Go ahead again, Vice Chairman Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wondered why we used the word shall use the university marketing instead of may.
Chairman Zwanitz, if you know.
Thank you for that question. So when we were in discussion, speaking to this program, the department came and asked for some money for military advertising for new recruits. And they were listing things like coffee cups, backpacks, ads in movie theaters. And it was just, it seemed like it was all over the board. And so one of the fine representatives that resides over the hill there suggested the university has a great department there that can locate, kids, because they're looking for that age group that would be interested in joining the Guard. And so that was the reason that we put shall, and that's also the reason why we decreased, or a large part of the reason that we decreased the budget, because we thought that they were going to go out and instead of them, shooting a shotgun, we wanted to aim a couple of bullets. And so that's why we said you shall use the university, and then we reduced the budget.
Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on footnote 6 on page 20 of the budget bill. We're talking about 2.3 million for the Wyoming Cowboy Challenge program. Is that what we spent to send cadets out of state to finish this program, or is that an allocation for something else to maintain a program that went away? Just a little explanation.
Representative Zwanen, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question. I believe that was the amount that we had in the program, and as many of you know, that got shut down over the summer. So that money, the ones that we don't use, it should revert. So the next question I will anticipate, and that is how many cadets do we still have in that program? And the number would be, from the original class, we still have 29 cadets. 10 of them went to the state north of us. 7 of them went to the state to the west of our state, the one with the handle on it. 12 of them went to the state way to where the sun sets, so it has the bear. And then 3 or 4 from the original class, they're still trying to make up their mind. They're going down to the state that has a lot of casinos. So as we have promised them, and the rest of the cadets, just so you know, a lot of them either went home or they went back and were able to get their GEDs through high school. And so as that program phases out, I assume that some of that money will come back.
Follow-up, Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, this is not new money. It's reauthorizing the use of the money that was appropriated in the standard budget to reuse it to finish them out in these other places. So it is not new money.
Further discussion on Section 7? Seeing none, we'll close Section 7 and move on to Section 10, Agriculture. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of section number 10, Department of Agriculture, please refer to page number 3 on your summary sheet and page 21 on your budget bill. And Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the Chief Executive's recommendation presented in Executive Letter number 9 for $1.48 million general fund one time for the Animal Damage Management Program. And you'll see that in summary note number 1 on your summary report. The increase in funding will bolster the state and local efforts to control predator populations while developing a more cohesive response to reduce livestock and wildlife losses to predators. The statewide livestock losses in Wyoming due to predators increased 40% from 2016 to 2022. That is the need for the increased funding. And with that, Mr. Chairman, are there any questions for agency number 10, Department of Agriculture?
Any questions? Section 10. Seeing no one jump into the mic, we'll close Section 10 and move on to Agency 11, Department of Revenue. I'm looking, there's Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for explanation of Section 11, Department of Revenue, I'd please refer you to page 4 on your summary sheet, page 23 of your budget bill. Looking at your summary sheet on page 4, on note 1, our JAC denied the executive's rec of 108,000 general funds and 1 full-time equivalent position lost in the 2021-2022 supplemental budget in administrative service divisions for an accountant. This is on budget request page 13. Going to note 2, the JAC adopted the executive's rec of 30,000 general funds for increased costs due to increased communications. This is for postage stamps and tax returns. Note 3, JEC adopted the executive's recommendation of $117,000, of which $23,319 is one time, and one full-time equivalent position in the Minerals Tax Division for a tax examination analyst for ad valorem tax collection. This is on your budget request, page 19, excuse me. On to note 4, JAC adopted the executive's rec of $77,000 general funds in property tax division for employee professional development and training provided by the Department for County Assessors Appraisal Certification Program. This is our budget request, page 23. Going on to note 5, JAC increased the executive's letter number 1 recommendation of $1 million general fund by $4 million general fund to a total of $5 million general funds for a total of $8 million appropriated. This includes $3 million currently in the standard budget for the property tax refund program. And amended footnote number 1 on page 23 and 24 of your budget bill, specifying these funds would be reduced dollar for any funds appropriated to this program or a substantially similar program for residential property taxes to be collected during fiscal year 2024. And finally, note 6, the JAC adopted the executive's recommendation of $126,000 enterprise funds, of which $25,161 is one time for a senior inspection specialist in the liquor division compliance section. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the explanation of section 11.
Any questions on Agency 11, Department of Revenue? Seeing none, or do you have a question, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem? You're up next. Okay, seeing no questions on the Department of Revenue, we'll close Agency 11 and open Agency 15, the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So this agency's budget request is relatively simple. As you are likely aware, the association that represents teachers, along with several school districts, have sued the state, saying that the money that this body allocated for K-12 education was not enough. You'll remember that as background, the federal government gave the school districts about $270 million and so much money that they had to ask us to increase their allowed cash savings, because so we doubled it and we did that. So because they have so much extra cash, they've decided to sue us for more. Okay, so that's the background of the litigation. The Attorney General says, look, we're kind of busy and we really do need a specialist because we're getting ganged up on not just by this education for the teachers, but also by these different school districts. This litigation is going to be very expensive. You'll see in note 1 to this agency that the Joint Appropriations Committee actually is giving this agency more money than it asked for. It asked for $358,174, which pays for the outside counsel and to fill an existing vacancy in the office to assist with this. And we said, well, look, we're not going to have a chance to authorize more spending on this for another year, so let's give you more. So we've upped that to $750,000. Notice that this money is not coming out of the general fund. If you look at the note, it comes out of S5. You'll see that JC increased the GovRec rec of 358, of which S5 is one time, to 750,000 S5. So S5, what is that? That's the school foundation program. So that's the account that's for the kids. Of course, the lawyers may have bumper stickers that say it's from the kids. I would stand for any questions.
Representative Chestick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Speaker Pro Tem, I just have a question. The additional funding for the lawsuit, is that primarily to pay attorney fees or expert witness fees?
Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. That's included in both because it's both for outside counsel and according to the narrative supplied to us by that agency, they expect to have many different experts that they will be retaining. So it's all in.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity on this, and this is just kind of for my own edification, the last time that the state was sued in this general idea, I'm curious if we actually had outside counsel or if we retained just inside. So that would be question number one. And then question number two is we already currently have 2 current staff attorneys that are dedicated to school foundation funding issues. So I guess I'm kind of curious if those 2 we're needing additional, if they're going to take the lead, if we're going to be asking for the lead to be going to outside counsel, what this ultimately looks like. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, the existing staff inside the agency, they will continue to be working on this, but yes, outside counsel is contemplated by this. And last, at least, I know 20 years ago, as one of these versions of this litigation was raging, the state did employ outside counsel, and I believe it's become customary to use outside counsel. And really the theory of outside counsel is that if you're if you're a legal department, you want to staff your valleys and outsource your peaks. And this would constitute a peak demand for legal services.
Further questions on Section 15, Attorney General? Seeing none, we'll close Section 15 and move on to Agency 20, the Department of Environmental Quality. Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're now on Section 20 of the Department of Environmental Quality. Members, this is found on page 5 of your status report and on pages 26 and 27 of your budget bill. On note 1 of the summary sheet, the JAC adopts Governor's Rec to add 1 full-time employee that was anticipated for those of you that were on the Minerals Committee last year, the passage of HB 045, Mine Reclamation Bonding Voluntary Assigned Trusts. This position was anticipated and will administer that program. Notes 2 and 3, Mr. Chairman, are actions the JAC made in response to concerns expressed by industries with large industrial projects currently moving through the permitting process, being able to get their permits processed efficiently and on time. In a previous bill where we talked earlier, I think it was last week, I mentioned a number of these. We've got a gold mine, we've got 3 or 4 large Trona projects that are in the process of pump storage, nuclear demonstration products, rare earth minerals, several wind projects, solar projects, and they've expressed concerns on getting these done in a timely manner, and there's a statutory requirement to this department to get them done. In visiting with the director, he expressed concern that they're getting them done, but it's kind of really pushing that, and largely because they've had, particularly in air quality, some of their people that do the modeling in order to do the permits have left. And so what we do in note 2 is we add, well, and the other concern that they had is this process is sometimes lengthy, and we don't want to get to the end of the project, submit it, and then find out that on page 1 we messed up and need to start completely over. We'd like to have some ongoing consultation with the department to do that. And so in note 2, we create 1 full-time employee as the deputy director and an ombudsman to coordinate the permitting efforts between the agencies and the applicant. This action is also addressed in footnote 2, found on page 26 and 27, indicating that the funding for this position is only for this fiscal period, requiring the agency to request it in their standard budget. That's a little bit challenging in getting anybody to apply if it's only going to be for a year, so we may look at an amendment to just make that as part of their standard budget. Note 3, then in visiting, if we don't have people ready to do that modeling, could we contract that out, similar to what we've seen energy companies doing on federal land, where they help pay for or got an outside contract to help with some of the permitting. This adds $1.5 million to the air quality division. It's good for 3 years to help with the modeling. In-house staff is insufficient challenge to keep up with the process and to keep the process on schedule. On note 4, JC adopts GovRec for an additional full-time employee to maintain the primacy requirements granted to the state in 2020 from the EPA as we started the carbon capture utilization and storage under the Clean Water Act. This is a big deal for the state to have primacy. We have to maintain the data and the information for that, and this provides a person to oversee, another person to help oversee in that permitting associated with Class 6 or Class 6 injection wells. Note 5, the JEC adopts GovRegs for an additional full-time employee to facilitate assistance in technical assistance with the anticipated infusion of $500 million federal funds to the clean water and drinking water funds for infrastructure projects around the state. This position requests an FTE is time limited through June of 2033. If I may, if you look at your budget, bill on page 26, you see up there on the authorized, and this is just kind of help you as sometimes we get tangled up a little bit. You'll look there and you'll see that there's, in the budget bill from last year, there's 256 employees, and then it shows that we increase it by 4 to 260. But as you look on your summary sheet, you see that that's 259, then we increase it to 260. The difference in those three is because in the summary sheet, those are already included in the governor's rec. Then JAC adds that other. So there's a rhyme and a reason for a little bit of that madness. Mr. Chairman, on note 6, JAC adopts governor's recs to reauthorize unspent funds in a completed AML, abandoned mine funds, which was a CO2 pipeline corridor, to augment the air quality division's air modeling and monitoring needs for industry. So sometimes when we finish those AML projects, we appropriate money for those particular projects, and it may not all be expended. This was the case in this, and so what do we do with those remaining funds? We have to reauthorize the use for them someplace else, and so we're moving them to air quality. Takes two actions. This one, where we reauthorize it, and then they have to go back to the EPA and request that the original grant be authorized to modify that. So you'll see that when we get to section 317, when we get into the section 300s. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a couple questions on footnote 2 specifically. So I want to start off with, I appreciate the heads up that we're probably going to see a floor amendment that would bring this to being a continued position. But let me start with my question to start out with. Is this 900 series, 100 series money? Is this going to be a contractual job, or is this something that we're going to be increasing and seeing this as a guaranteed full-time employee? And then looking at on line 26 in the budget bill, it's a deputy director / ombudsman. And that just seems to me like that's a very unique combination of titles. They already have a deputy director, so my question is the deputy director position that is available, is this going to augment that position that's available? And then looking at it as the ombudsman portion of things, I look at $180,000 and I see a very large chunk of money for a one-year portion of that. So does that explain salary and fringe, or is that just strictly everything associated with that? And then my last question on this is, if we are worried about getting this going as early as possible, should this funding be available immediately to the department as opposed to waiting until July 1st for the supplemental? Because if we're looking at trying to get these things processed, it would seem to me that going out, putting the application for the Department of Administration and Information to put the posting out, do the hiring process, you're looking 4 or 5 months down the road. That only leaves 6 or 7 months for this person to actually get into the job and do what they're supposed to do. So I'm a little concerned that this may not be enough time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, and it's a great question, and it takes on 2 or 3 aspects. So the good Chairman of Transportation talks about, will this be in the Series 100 or the Series 900? So on the 1.5 million that we contract out, which is the other note in there, that'll all be Series 900. That'll be for contract. This new position in footnote 2 for the ombudsman / deputy director, will be in the Series 100, will be in, and I would agree that it really does need to be ongoing. It is for salary and benefits, and there is not a deputy director position in that agency currently. And that's why when we reached out to the director and says, what should this be? And he says, we'd like it to be, because we don't have a deputy director, we kind of have a guy that's been there a while that fills in, but it could, and then they could fill both positions. Yeah, we kind of kill two birds with one stone.
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is,
My apologies, but I do need to, the supplemental budget's effective immediately, so the 1.5 would be effective immediately. That position probably they would start advertising it to take probably to about July to get it in place. My apologies for interrupting.
thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Locke, go ahead.
No problem. This is more just for me trying to learn and make sure I understand these numbers. So just looking at lines 4 and 5 in that budget, roughly in that, it's roughly 296,000, and then footnote 2 talks about 180,000. Can you just, for education purpose, help me with the difference between some of those bullets down there and the difference in the numbers that are actually the previous and the current number, so I can better understand and track those numbers? Thank you.
Go ahead, Vice Chairman Larson.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask you again, when you were making reference to the line numbers, was that in the budget bill, was it not?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that is correct. So lines 4 and 5, and then, of course, footnote 2 down on line 25, actually line 26, where it says the 180,000. I'm just trying to map these numbers in some rational way to the actual $296,000 difference between lines 4 and 5 in the budget bill. Correct, sir? Thank you.
Okay.
Vice Chairman Larson.
And Mr. Chairman, maybe I can just visit with you on the side and we'll get you caught up on that.
Further discussion or questions on Agency 20, Department of Environmental Quality? Seeing none, we'll go to Agency 21, Department of Audit, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring for explanation Section 21, Department of Audit. This is on page 5 of your summary sheet and page 11 of your budget bill. Mr. Chairman, then note 1, our JAC adopted the executive's recommendation of $352,000 special revenue, of which $70,000 is one time for 12 months and $281,000 is biannualized for fiscal year 2025. This is for salary and benefit increases for banking examiners to help reverse the loss of financial examiner experience due to significant banking division staff turnover. So I'd just like to provide a little additional information and background. Special revenue is generated by this banking division because the people that they examine pay a fee for those examinations. And these examiners require substantial experience in these areas when they get ready to go out to do an examination. And because of situations related to compensation and benefit, there's been some substantial turnover in this important division for our state. And so this exception request is designed to help stop and reverse that turnover. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the explanation. If there are any questions.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that we're adding salary and benefit increases here, and I see in a few other places throughout the budget where we've increased salary. Is this going to be a holistic viewpoint where we're going to increase salary for everyone, or are we going to find it in piecemeal throughout different departments throughout the budget?
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. I'll just address the banking division piece of this, if I may. Last budget session, we did quite a bit of good work on an initial pay raise and compensation increase. there's a thing called market rate. It's what it's what a particular work area would fetch in the current market. And we made significant progress in moving this up. This here helps to finish the job on that, particularly for this one banking division. It's not related to the rest of the global enterprise. And most importantly, each agency, as you read in your budget request, provides additional background on the reasons for their exception requests. Thank you.
Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think that's a great question by the representative from District 18. So here's the story. There are two places in the budget where there's employee compensation that is specific to that agency. This is one of them, and the other one was in the treasurer's office. Other than that, all of the general state employees, that will be treated in the Section 300, that'll be Section 310 and Section 329, which we'll talk about later. But so to answer the question, it happens twice, one for the bank examiners and one in the treasurer's office.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we were told that we can't legislate through the budget, so could you just help me understand why it is that we saw a bill dealing with the treasurer's office that increased salary and benefits for our investment officers, and here we're seeing a salary and benefit increase for banking examiners without a bill? Thank you.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's best if I address the good representative's question separately, but just for general information, I think these targeted areas, everyone could agree, the banking and the investment areas are areas that require a higher level of skill and experience to make sure that we get the results that we're looking for. These folks are very highly trained, very highly qualified, and they could go anywhere and get a job. And we work so hard to build our own capabilities within the state. I think it's important we try to work together and keep. I appreciate the question. I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Larson.
I'm really proud of this good representative because, and the difference is the bill we passed changed the statutes in the Green Book in the Treasurer's office. This does not. And so you can do it in the budget bill. Remember, and we talked about in the amendments to make sure, when you're doing amendments, make sure that you don't start flirting with a change in the Green Books. And this does not. This salary increase, the salary for bank examiners is already established. We're just allowing for a pay raise, and it doesn't change the Green Book.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could probably hold this question till later in the discussion, but it's fresh on my mind right now. So with these couple of organizations that we're putting salary increases right now, will they be excluded later on when we give another wage increase holistically, or will they get two salary bumps in 1 year? Thank you.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The answer is yes and no.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on footnote number 1. When it talks about these salary and benefit increases, it says it's one time. If I could get an explanation how we do one-time increases and how this will not affect future budgets.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you read the entirety of summary note number 1, 70,000 of it is one time of that total 352,000. This is effective immediate. So the 70,000 gets us from April through the end of June, and then the remaining amount will be a biennialized number because that's when the second half of the biennium begins. And so that is the reason that the 70,000 is one time, the remaining amount will be a biennializing number.
Vice Chairman Larson.
That's a great observation, and if you go back to Section 20 on note 4, you see a similar action where that was a 15-month thing, and they one-time that 3-month that will get us through this year, but it's a great catch.
Further discussion on Agency 21, Department of Audit? Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, and as a follow-up, I believe that for the bank examiners and for the treasurer's office, they get both the general pay increase contemplated in Section 300 and this one. These are expensive employees. So as background, the representative from the relevant banking industry said, we want people to work as bank examiners who are qualified. We actually need the examiners to be there to show up and do a good job.
All right, with that, we will close Agency 21, Department of Audit, move on to Agency 23, Public Service Commission, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of Agency 23, the Public Service Commission, please refer to page 6 in your summary sheet and page 29 on your bill. Mr. Chairman, the Public Service Commission, or the PSC, consists of the PSC and the Office of the Consumer Advocate. The role of the PSC is to protect the public interest in its interactions with public utilities providing service in the state of Wyoming. The role requires balancing the interests of Wyoming utility customers with the financial interests of the utilities. The Office of the Consumer Advocate is an independent division within the PSC whose statutory mission is to represent the interests of the Wyoming citizens and all classes of utility customers in matters involving public utilities. The PSC is a self-funded agency receiving revenue through an assessment on gross interstate retail revenues of all entities subject to the assessment pursuant to Statute 37-107. Mr. Chairman, the JAC adopted the Chief Executive's recommendation, including $136,000 for a one-time for an FTE for a facilities engineer, and this is summary note number 1. And of that $136,000, $20,000 is federal funds and $115,000 is special revenue. Additionally, $5,300 of that will be one time, and really that $5,300 is office setup is the way I would look at that. So there's currently 3 facility engineers who conduct gas pipeline safety inspections in the PSC. This additional individual will aid in infrastructure public safety inspections due to the additional inspection days required based on the recently released U.S. Department of Transportation Safety of Gas Gathering Pipeline requirements. So there's more work to be done due to some federal requirements, so we need additional inspectors to do that. Again, that is in summary note number 1. Moving on to summary note number 2, $166,000 for another FTE for a principal economist. This position will monitor, analyze, and report to the Commission on regional issues that affect energy utilities. And then moving on to the final summary note, or final 2 summary notes, and this is one time to transfer 2 partial positions from Unit 0601 to Unit 0101. And so really we're moving from the Wyoming Universal Service Fund to the administration unit within the department. And this will only take place if the bill that is currently down at the other end of the hall fails. And in that case, the other funds within the PSC will be used. If that bill passes both ends, which is, like I said, is currently down at the other end of the hall, those positions will continue to be paid with the universal service funds. And that's a sunset extension bill is what's taking place at the other end of the hall. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions, if there are any, on the Public Service Commission, Agency 23.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you explain again, you mentioned that this was a self-funded entity, but we do have appropriations here. I'm just catching up on that. Could you explain that? Thanks.
Representative Walters, talk about special revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the revenue is generated by the agency. The appropriations take place through the legislative process because we are the appropriations branch of government. So rather than these being general funds, they are, again, the revenue is derived by the agency, but it is the legislature's responsibility to appropriate those funds to the agency.
All right, seeing no further comment on Public Service Commission, we'll close Agency 23 and move on to Agency 24, the State Parks and Cultural Resources. Welcome, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Section 24, State Parks and Cultural Resources. This is found on page 6 of your summary sheet and page 30 of your budget bill. So there are no changes in full-time employees and a net increase in $6 million in general funds. The mission of our state parks is to provide our citizens and visitors a variety of opportunities to enjoy our arts, parks, heritage, museum, and history. The agency studies and preserves Wyoming's history and prehistory for our benefit. Out of their 9 primary programs, the governor's recommendations focused on 2 areas. The first is funding for the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund. In his letter number 14, the governor requested $8 million. JAC decreased the governor's rec by $2 million and adopted $6 million for this trust fund. This program provides grants to nonprofits and governmental agencies in support of our arts, culture, heritage, and history. Projects range from the restoration of a historic caboose in Chugwater to a saddle makers symposium in Uena County and a PBS documentary about fossil hunters in Kemmer, which is very good. The second request comes for the Office of Outdoor Recreation, and this is for administration of the office, which strives to enhance and expand our outdoor recreation industry and improve outdoor recreation infrastructure and access within our beautiful state. So if you look at footnote number 7, which is on page 32 of the budget bill, and that's note number 2 on your summary sheet, JAC adopted the governor's rec for $400,000 in special revenue from tourism funds to support the current biennium operations for the Office of Outdoor Recreation. Again, this is not the grant program, this is administration. So this includes things like the 2 existing full-time coordinator positions and up to 6 existing seasonal positions. These coordinators work with local communities and the State Office of Tourism to facilitate community outdoor recreation collaboratives with a focus on educating, dispersing, and concentrating visitors to where they're supposed to be. They also work to expand and market the number of outdoor recreation events in our communities. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we get a little more conversation behind the reason that the governor's request was decreased by $2 million? What was the reasoning behind that for our understanding? Thank you.
Representative Sherwood.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think this was a difference in opinion between the 2 bodies, something that we have since finessed and are hoping to bring an amendment to show that where we're at currently with that position.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just if we could get a little clarification on what the current balance of the trust fund is and what the anticipated return is going to be in the next year.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great question. So the goal for this trust fund is $30 million. Currently, they're about $12 million short of that goal. So 30 minus 12 is the balance.
Further questions? All right, seeing no further questions, Agency 24, State Parks and Cultural Resources, will close Agency 24 and open Agency 27, the State Construction Department. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of Agency 27, your State Construction Department, please refer to page 7 on your summary sheet and page 33 in your bill. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the Chief Executive's recommendation in the supplemental budget request of $9 million S6, that's School Capital Construction Account, for major maintenance, seen in summary note number 1. This increase is due to a change in the formula caused by the cost of labor and materials. This is an activity that gets reviewed annually. This is not a biennial budget in state construction, and that is why we are seeing it this year. Mr. Chairman, JAC decreased the Chief Executive's original recommendation of $21.7 million by $1.36 million for school capital construction to total $20,337,956 for K-12 inflation on prior appropriations. This decrease was based on updated numbers from the time the Chief Executive prepared his budget and the time JAC approved the budget. So they were just refined, and that's the number that's currently needed. And Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $117,000, of which 23,000 is one time for an FTE or for an account analyst to assist with the construction, procurement, and accounting. And that is seen in summary note number 3. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would entertain any questions.
I'm waiting to see if there's a question. I think there is. Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question regarding the school capital construction bill that is coming from the other side of the building and how this ties in with that, please.
If you could, Representative Walters.
Mr. Chairman, I am unaware of any bill coming from the other side, so I'm unable to answer that question.
Okay, further questions on Agency 27, state construction? There will be. We'll give it just a second. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could just please clarify, I thought we heard earlier in this session that all of the school capital construction projects were completed, that we were just looking at maintenance. So I was just kind of wondering about this note.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm unsure where the information may have came from that all school capital construction is complete. That is not the case, so I don't know where that may have occurred. I did not hear that anyhow. So then later in the budget bill and later in the presentation, we'll get to section 313, where we will discuss further school capital construction. But major maintenance, as well as this inflationary change, occurs in what I would describe more as the administrative role of the state construction department, and that's why that component will show up there. And then we have the section 313, which is the actual activities of school capital construction that will be a later discussion today or tomorrow.
Representative Ottman.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Okay, so as we go through these different sections, can it be really pointed out when these things will run from the April to June, or whether they are biennium, or whether they are just a one-time yearly thing? I think you're doing it, but you know, it's a lot. You guys are very familiar, so if you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
It is so ordered upon the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a committee as a whole, we're trying to do our best to be very clear as to which items will biennialize, which items will be one-time, and which items will be continuing or sustained. So the difference is, if it biennializes, it's obviously going to double. If it's continued, it's going to be the same amount moving forward in the next biennium, so it doesn't double. And then the real obvious one is one-time. I mean, it's just a number on the page is all that expense is. And so if you go to summary note number 3, for example, for this new position, the $23,000 one-time is what I would describe as position setup, office materials. And I know that seems like a lot, but position setup as a whole is why that is one time. Then the 117 is a number that will biennialize. And so that's why that summary note is very clear as to how much of the total will, and actually not the 117 will not biennialize. 117 minus 23, that difference is what will biennialize. The 23 is the one-time amount. And so all of these summary notes, all of these footnotes are very clear as to how much of it is a biennializing number and how much of it is one time. And we will continue to do our best to try and point those out and be very clear with the body what is going to be a one-time and what is going to be an ongoing expense.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify my earlier question, I just wanted to know how this particular change intersects with Senate File 66, which just did pass the other body and now we'll be working on this side.
Vice Chairman Larson, you want to jump in?
So if I could go back to note 3, because you will see this one-time appropriation with the new position several times that seems to be excessive. And when in the supplemental budget, for the most time, we do that as an annual amount, and it takes place in July, when the fiscal year starts. But in some instances, they have the positions ready now. And so they would fund that starting in April. And so there'd be April, May, June, 3 months of this current year that you would provide that funding, but would only be one time. And so that's there's some setup, but in some of these, the agencies will use a 15-month because they need the position filled sooner, but most times it's just 12 months, and so you won't see that large one-time component of the salary.
Further discussion, Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a question about the activity that had taken place at the other end of the hall and it passing or not passing. A quick review of what that bill may have been. It will not impact this particular section as drafted, and so that's the best I can report, trying not to discuss what our colleagues down the other end of the building do.
All right, seeing no further discussion on Agency 27, we'll close that section and move to Agency 37. State Engineer, Representative Zwanitz, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For explanation of Section 37, the State Engineer, please find on page 7 of your summary sheet, and also look for it on page 34 of your budget bill. So the JAC adopted the governor's letter number 8, which is to add $500,000 general fund for contract services to develop the hydrologic modeling system for the Green River and Little Snake River basins. And we also added $650,000 general fund and 1 full-time equivalent position for modeling research and/or coordination as needed, and added footnote number 2 on page 35 of the budget bill, And I believe there'll be an amendment coming out on second reading on that particular area. Also, the executive's recommendation requested that, and JAC adopted, that the state engineer's office receive $40,000 in general fund for the remainder of the 2023 biennium, and each biennium going forward to work with the consulting firm related to the North Platte River Basin and the 2001 modified North Platte Decree. Just as another note, the state engineer's office has about 116 positions, and they've had like 24 of those overturned recently since the last year. And so they're having a really tough time keeping some institutional knowledge in that office. And this consulting firm has been a steady rock for them, and they're very important as they're looking at knowledge of consumption conversion rates that have to be adjusted on a yearly basis. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Chairman Washut is first to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard several conversations since I've been here about the Colorado River, and that several other states have fairly large contingents of people who are working on their Colorado River response and plan and preparation. And it seems like we only have one, maybe in Wyoming. I'm just wondering if the JAC is convinced that we have adequate resources devoted to that important effort.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, question as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one curiosity, Representative Swanitz, sir, on the well drillers licensing, if you could please explain to me what exactly that entails and what the reasoning behind that dollar amount is, please.
Representative Zwanitz, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may need a little help on that second one. But on the first one, there was good discussion about if we have enough attorneys, and the rumor is we only have one and all the other states have several. And so the discussion in the committee and with the other side was the fact that we need to start building up our resources. Having said that, there may be a little bit of disagreement if we really need another one or if we don't need another one. And so, as I mentioned, I think you'll see a little better discussion on this whole issue when we get to second reading amendments.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer the good majority floor leader's question, well drilling, to drill a water well in the state, you have to be licensed, and that goes through the state engineer's office.
Any further discussion on Agency 37, State Engineer? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 37, go to Agency 39, the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. And we'll welcome back Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Section 39, our Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust. This is found on page 8 of your summary sheet and page 36 of your budget bill. There are no net changes to employees. The agency mission is governed by a board of 9 citizens, each representing a geographic district and collectively reflecting a broad spectrum of experiences, including wildlife, agriculture, energy, sportsmen and women, and tourism, per state statute. Income from the trust account is used to fund wildlife and natural resource conservation programs. So this first request is from Governor's Letter number 10. This is note 1, corresponding with footnote 4 in the budget bill on page 37. This provides $1.5 million for preventing the introduction and containing the spread of invasive species, both plants and aquatic. Too bad our zebra mussels don't eat cheatgrass. So we adopted the governor's rec, but as requested earlier, or the question came earlier from the chairwoman of TRW, we moved these funds from the governor's office to the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust because we felt like could be more nimble with them. The second request comes from Governor's Letter number 13. This is note number 2, corresponding with footnote number 5 in the budget bill on page 37, and deposits $5 million in general funds into the corpus of the trust and matches that with another $5 million in interest earned by the trust account. So this combined $10 million gets the corpus to its inflation-proof goal of $200 million. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Are there any questions on Agency 39? We do. Representative Pendergraft. Representative Pendergraft, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know about you, but I'm used to doing with budgets about $50, which is what my life leaves me at the end of the month to play with. But I'm looking at this and I pulled up that letter number 13 from the governor, and I'm a little lost. It looks to me like he says in his letter, established by the legislature in 2005, this program has been an unqualified success for our iconic wildlife, open spaces, habitat, quality of life. It helps assure Wyoming's wildlife is available for future generations. The goal amount of the corpus is a minimum of $200 million, and that's going to be my first question, is why that number when at a current level of $190 million, they had an extra $5 million. So if you could help me out, if they had an extra $5 million and then they wanted to throw another $5 million in to make it a nice round 200, why do we need 200 if they had extra 190?
Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chairman, so my understanding, and this is in the governor's letter, is that $5 million is from earnings from the trust. So instead of putting it into the grant program, they're proposing putting it back into the corpus. And as to why the minimum of 200 million, I will need to phone a friend.
Representative Larson.
So a couple of years ago, maybe, hell, it's probably been longer than that, we passed a bill that said that if there were leftover funds in the income account or the construction account of the Wildlife Trust Fund, if the board so wanted to take any of those and put them into the corpus, because the goal has always been, since the trust fund was created, to get it up to $200 million, that they could do so. And so what we do here is we take 500 general funds, and or 5 million general funds, and then we match it with 5 million extra that they have in that trust account to make the 10 million, get it up to approximately the 200 million.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, is this 5 million, is this the first time we've had an excess of funds that we want to return to the corpus, or has there been a years before where there's been some amount
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say yes, but I'm not sure enough to fall on the sword on it, Representative Bear. But I just remember when I served on that commission, they says, in the event we have construction projects that we've done, that we funded, conservation projects, and maybe there's some excess funds left in there, give them the flexibility, kind of like what we're saying in some of these other funds that we have, that they can put it back into the corpus to help it grow.
Any further testimony on Agency 39? Representative Zwanitzer? No? Okay, we'll close Agency 39, Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund. Privilege of the floor? Go ahead.
Yes, privilege of the floor. For members of the body, if any of you are looking for what a letter from the governor looks like, I do have copies of them on my desk. They are on the internet, but for quick reference, they're on top of my desk. Thank you.
And with that, we will open Agency 48, Department of Health. Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll follow up again. I think we talked about this the other day a little bit, but we'll go ahead and get when we get the governor's budget and we start through that process in the fall and we get to the final points, there's always seems to be some last minute things on, oh, we forgot to do this, put it in the budget. He does that through an official governor's letter. So we always have some governor's letters that we're dealing with. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, folks, we're on Section 048, the Department of Health, and that's found on page 9 of your status report, pages 38 through 48 of your bill. This is the largest agency in state government. You will see, if you look at your bill, you'll see that the biennial number, if we adopt all of the recommendations, will be $2 billion, a little over $2 billion a year. 90% of this agency's budget, actually with this, it's a little over 90% now, goes out into services to the people of the state. So you'll see in some agencies, for example, are heavy in equipment like YDOT or some of these. This goes out to mental health and to developmental children, Medicaid, and of those sorts of things. In 2021, when we had to make some significant cuts, we cut $112 million out of general funds out of this agency. And since that time, those of you who were here, you remember that that first year, it was actually over 112, and we put some back in because we just felt that we cut too far. We was ready to make those cuts, but we found out when we got here during the session that we didn't need to, so we put some of the step 3 back in. We talk about a step 2 and a step 3. When we was in that fiscal year, the first fiscal year of the budget, the step 2 came in the second half of that first fiscal year, and then the step 3 were to take place in the second fiscal year. So we made those cuts, and then last year, as we kind of started getting back on our feet a little bit, we tried to restore some more of those cuts into the Department of Health because they impacted the services that some people were able to get. Just as an example, if you were somebody on the waiver program, then you would you receive perhaps respiratory therapy or physical therapy. Speech therapy is necessary for you for your swallowing reflex. And we cut and put a cap on that and said that you would be able to only be able to get as many as Medicaid will allow. Well, Medicaid only allows for, I'm trying to think of the word to respond when rehabilitative, I thought of rehabilitative efforts rather than ongoing maintenance. And so if you had somebody that you had to wait for their swallowing reflex to go away and become a problem, then you could get more services. And so we fixed that. We brought that funding back into where they could maintain rather than go from tragedy to tragedy. You will see in this budget again this year trying to finish putting those cuts back in. But what we heard over the course of this year is that those providers who are competing with direct service people that like CNAs and nurses are challenged to be able to pay what they need to pay to keep these people in place. So they're not able to provide as many services, and so we try to adjust that. One of the things that you'll hear me talk about again is a waiver. And what does that mean when we talk about that in this budget? It's important, and I'll just say that a waiver is something that allows the state to waive certain portions of federal law or rules in order to offer services in a different setting or a different amount or in a different way. A good example is we'll talk about the DD waivers, the developmentally disabled waivers, the comprehensive or support. In those programs, we waive certain aspects of the normal Medicaid rules in order to provide services in the home or community instead of an institution, which would be the traditional state plan. So we provide those services out. So with that little brief overview, folks, this agency, I said, is about 35% of the total state budget. It's particularly important in both terms of size and services provided to the constituent. In my years presenting this agency's budget, there's generally a fair number of questions from the body on funding of the various programs provided by the agencies. And if I can't answer them today, please get with me when we conclude, and we'll make sure that you have the information you need to make the decisions you want to make. Some of you will recall we talked about those. In this supplemental budget, as I point out, we go to further restore some of the cuts that we made. On note 1 of the summary sheet, footnote 13 found on the bottom of page 45 and on the top of page 46 of your budget bill authorizes up to $39 million of potential reversions from the department transferred to a new Wyoming State Hospital demolition account. So when we built the new state hospital, the campus that's vacated has a lot of buildings. This state has not traditionally done really well at cleaning up their mess. We still have the old prison in Rollins. We have some buildings in Lander. And so as we finished up with the state hospital in Evanston, the question is, how do we then demolish or get rid of these old buildings? It's a Department of Health facility. And so what we're taking, if they have any reversions, the Department of Construction estimates it'll take about 25 to 26 million to completely do all the demolition project. We're going to start, if they have reversions, putting money in there to get that done. You won't see this reflected within the budget bill because it's just setting it up and the reversions aren't in place. We don't know what those are yet. That will come. They'll be able to do that. Note 2 in the summary sheet in the director's office and footnote 14 found on page 46 of the bill provides $150,000 for the reimbursement of liability insurance requirement by volunteer health care professionals and nonprofit health care facilities that provide services as outlined in statutes 129. If you go down to healthcare financing, which is Medicaid, in notes 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, JAC adopts the governor's recommendations. Note 3 is for $9.5 million is an increase of the Medicaid enrollment for Medicare enrollment for people who are on Medicaid and qualify for Medicare. So if you're a person who is of the age that you can get Medicare, which is a federal insurance, but they're on Medicaid, we transition them to Medicare, but the state has to pay for that enrollment fee. Saves the state considerably by having them on Medicare. Note 4 authorizes Department of Health to use $18 million of federal funds that were a result of the public health emergency being extended. We talked about that the other day. Every time we receive more federal funds, if we don't authorize the use of them, they just sit there. And so the public health emergency, we have anticipated that ending for some period of time. This lasts about $9 million a quarter. The last 2 quarters, they had not had authority to use those monies. Those monies are coming to the state, and we're authorizing the Department of Health to use them. Note 5 was to increase the Medicaid dental rates. We found a sharp decrease over the last several years on dentists who are willing to provide reimbursement rate. I asked the director when the last time that was done, and he couldn't recall there being a change in the Medicaid rate for dentists since he's been with the state. This equates to about a 25% increase. Note 6 is to increase medical reimbursement to the nursing homes, long-term care, to cover more of their allowable cost. The governor requested $5.5 million in general funds and $5.5 million in reversions, which would then be matched by $11 million in federal funds. The general funds are reflected in the number calculations on the budget bill, but the reversions you won't see, again, because we may not have reversions, but if they have that amount, they can use them to provide increase to long-term care. In note 7 is to increase federal funding for actual costs to cover services provided by Indian Health Service. You see, I think that's $45 million. That's a pass-through. That's a treaty agreement between most registered tribes that healthcare is provided through Indian Health Service, reimbursement through Medicaid, and that's a pass-through that's through this through the state. Note 8 on the summary sheet refers to footnote 15A found on page 46 of the bill. This action by the JAC reduces the waiver wait list for people who have been waiting to get waiver services. We do this periodically. We fund if a person meets the criteria for receiving waiver services. They have to go through an evaluation, and they do that. Then they are given an individual budget amount that stays with them for their life. And as they go through and they get those services, what we're finding that with that fixed amount of money, if once that's used up, then there aren't any funds unless somebody dies. Boom, that money can come back and you can bring somebody off the wait list. But if not, what we found is that wait list grows. We currently have 537 people on it. This action would reduce that number by 281, and these are all individuals who either have waited for at least 18 months, and some of them as long as 5 years. We of this group on the wait list that we would be funding, 180 are under 21 years of age, 84 are over 21, and 17 are over 21 with an acquired brain injury. Note 9 on the summary sheet refers to footnote 15B, where we restored the 2021 step 2, 2.5% reduction in Medicaid reimbursement to the developmental disability providers' Medicaid reimbursement. Note 10 refers to note 15C. And this action, the JAC further addresses what we started last year to increase the DD agency provider rates to align more closely with most recent consultant rebasing recommendations. The good chairman of Appropriations mentioned this in his opening remarks. We get rebased. Some of these programs get rebased periodically, and last year we tried to, we provided about a half of what was needed, thought that we could do some readjusting. We found that some of these folks are selling assets and are struggling on a monthly basis to provide those services. And so this rebasing and this appropriation will pay their direct care staff at the consultant's recommendation of about 75% of the national labor standards rate. Note 11, JAC denied governor's rec to add an additional full-time employee as a crisis care coordinator in note 12, and footnote 16 found on page 47 of the budget bill shows that the JAC adopted the governor's rec for $5 million one time to implement the behavioral health redesign changes. You'll recall, those of you that have been here for a few years, we've been doing that behavioral health redesign for our community mental health centers. And we've been tasked by legislation and we had a subcommittee to work with them to get that approved. That's ready to go into effect this next July. And we've anticipated this appropriation since the last year's bill that appropriated this, that made this recommendation. Now, you'll see this $5 million also in an ARPA request. If the ARPA approves it, then it won't be in this bill. In note 13, the governor we denied governor's rec for the agency's annual enrollment estimates for the developmental preschools and adjusted that amount to reflect the actual number. When the governor does his budget, the DD preschools do not know what their actual child count is. That's not due till December 1st. Governor's budget's in August, so they kind of make a rough estimate, and we adjust that each year when we know either up or down, and we have adjusted it down in the past if the population of those children increases or decreases. On note 14, JAC increased the governor's rec in this fiscal year's ECA for the DD preschools by $2 million, making the total amount $4 million. This additional amount is to make up part of the previous unfunded ECAs to the developmental preschools. Just mechanics on that to help you understand, every time there's an ECA in K-12, the following year, the Department of Health is required to make an ECA request for the developmental preschools. The reason for that is they use the same professional staff, occupational therapists, speech therapists, physical therapists, and so forth. And so there's a constant pressure on the DD preschools and the K-12 for those positions. So when they make that request back to us, we're not required to grant that ECA, and we oftentimes don't. So this year, adding that extra $2 million made up for some of the past ECAs that we haven't granted for these. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the developmental preschools, their charge is to really 2 by 2, do 2 evaluations by age 2, and to work with these kids to identify developmental delays and help them to get past those delays. We know the sooner we do that and get that done by 3rd grade and by going into kindergarten, that they're on a much better track for success. Finally, in the Department of Aging, note 15, the JAC adopted the governor's rec to fund Wyoming Home Services for the 2nd year. When we done the standard budget, we funded it for the 1st year, and then we asked the department to see if they could find perhaps an 1115 waiver that would allow funding through a different source. The Department of Health done that, found that they really couldn't, but were able to identify maybe another means to get some additional funding outside of that. So we fund this 2nd year, and then note 16, we require the Department of Budget or Department of Health to pursue that narrowly tailored long-term care waiver that would include services for our senior citizens. Now, are there any questions?
Let's start with Representative Ward. You were first to mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 4, it says JEC adopted the governor's recommendation of an $18 million one-time for the public health emergency. What public health emergency?
So whether,
Representative Larson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize, but thank you for, so whether we agree that there was or was not a public health emergency associated with the outbreak of COVID, it's a term that is used and is reflected on in Center for Medicaid Services reflecting. So during the time when they declared a public health emergency associated with COVID, there was an enhanced Medicaid rate. And we've talked about how our FMAP is at 50/50. They increased that by 5.6%. And so over the course of that time, they increased that. And as a condition of that, then people continued to receive services. Nobody knew when CMS was going to say that the public health emergency had ended. So we continued on a quarterly basis to receive funds in, and we have to authorize the use of those funds. And again, they've now declared that emergency over, effective in April, and so we have this last 2 quarters of funding that we're authorizing that enhanced amount of money coming to the state. So that's the source, and that's the source of the term used.
Follow-up, Representative Ward? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, you testified that we can waive certain portions of Medicaid requirements. Earlier, it was testified that we can't waive Medicaid requirements. So can you clarify, what do you mean when you say we can waive certain portions of Medicaid requirements but not others?
I can.
Vice Chairman Larson, after consultation with the good chairman of appropriations.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman. In case I miss a few more, I've had to do that a lot this year. So within a Medicaid program, there are conditions of participation that must be complied with, or you could lose those funding. For example, at the facility in Lander where it's an ICF facility, if they don't have staffing right, or if they don't meet conditions of participation, you can lose that funding. A waiver is to allow you to use innovation to provide similar or expanded services to the same population, but at a net, tried at a expenditure neutral amount. So we, when several years ago, we tried to get an 1115 waiver to enhance on the Wind River Reservation the amount of services that are allowed there and having to be cost neutral. You can do that. In our DD waiver, you allow these people to now be taken care of within their home or within the community and receive reimbursement from Medicaid rather than in the traditional sense of within an institution. But once you're there, you have to comply with those.
Either question on subsection 4? Seeing none, moving on. Representative, Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Vice Chairman, for footnote number 8, I wanted to see if we can get a little bit more discussion on this. So you said there's 537 people on the wait list that have, and some of them have been there for 5 years, and we're reducing it by 281. That's great. Question on that 282nd person, like, so the people that we are leaving on the wait list, how long has that last person been on the wait list?
Vice Chairman Larson, if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Yin, if you could say that just a little louder and a little slower for an old guy that doesn't hear very well.
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
He didn't mean to use your name, and he meant to refer to you as Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, it's fine. So, Mr. Chairman, the question again was the comprehensive waiver wait list. you said that there are 537 people that are currently on it. The amount that's being budgeted here is a reduction of 281 people off the wait list. I'm curious if we know what the person who isn't getting off the wait list, how long that person has been waiting on the wait list.
If you know.
Mr. Chairman, so those that are waiting under 18 months could, and that's, we'll just pretend that somebody, and maybe comes on today and would wait and have been waiting at least 18 months, and there's 175 of those, and 175 of those are under age 21 children, and 70 over 21, and 11 over 21 with acquired brain injuries. And to get those off the waiver would be just about the same amount. It'd be about $15 million to get everybody off the waiver. The last time we reduced the waiver, I want to say, it was our last year at the Jonah.
Good. Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question about the ECA external cost adjustment in the footnote here. I understood that we did ECAs with education bills, and I thought that was a byproduct of litigation years ago. Do we use ECAs anyplace else besides Department of Health and Education? Do we use that model to keep other agencies up to speed?
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good Chairman of Judiciary, not that I'm aware of. But the reason the ECA is attached here is because when they created the funding model, that was put into the statute as the requirement to adjust the model for them. And if you look at how the developmental preschools are funded, it's a cost per child that have been identified with a developmental delay. In the Part C program that's under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA, 0 to 3, I believe, is Part C, and then, or 0, infant to up to 3 is Part C, and then from 3 to 5 comes into the special education Part B that is included in K-12. And I think that may be the reason for that tie back to the ECA. But again, they're competing for the same professional staff that addresses those developmental delays in those pre-kindergarten kids, as well as all through special education with kids with individual education plans.
Representative Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the preschool ECA. So the last time that the legislature increased it was 2017, and we increased it by 2.73%. Prior to that, the last time we increased it was 2011. And the reasons that we haven't increased it is because we're required by statute to evaluate it and make a recommendation each year. But every time we do it, once you increase it, then it becomes a maintenance of effort, and you have to maintain that amount. And frankly, we just hadn't been willing to put those additional dollars into the preschool line item because either the funds were or the will wasn't there to have those continuing obligations. But because we haven't done it since 2017, we believed it was appropriate at this juncture, at least to raise it a minor percentage.
Vice Chairman Larson.
So the good chairman mentioned the maintenance of effort. So on these developmental preschools, and again in special education, we receive funding through the IDEA, that program, Individual Developmental Education Act. And as a requirement of that, they're saying to maintain those funds that you get, they can't supplant any state funds, but you can use those to supplement and enhance programs. So anytime we increase the state's portion, in order to continue receiving those federal funds, we have to maintain our funding at that new level. And that's what we call a maintenance of effort. We see that in a number of places, and it's always one of the questions that we ask on appropriations is, if we do this, does this put a maintenance of effort requirement on us? And so it's something that you always have to be cognizant of.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. If we could go over note number 6 with the nursing home costs. There was a couple things. One, I didn't hear when we went over that, so I don't know if I just missed it or maybe it was skipped. So if we could go over that. And then also when I looked on page 27 for that in the budget bill, I can't seem to determine where it is on that page. So if you could just clarify that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, I apologize, but on that page 27, that is on, if you went into the agency's individual budget, it would be there, not in the budget bill, okay? And so one of the concerns that we have as we move forward, and we have to pay attention to as legislators, is our, and we mentioned it this morning, 65 to 70% of all long-term care beds, nursing home care beds, are paid for by Medicaid. People going into retirement have not particularly saved well. And the cost, there's a cost formula that the Department of Health and Medicaid use to determine reimbursement. We haven't been funding that. I think we're like I think last year with what we put in and that upper payment level thing, it might get us up to like 80%. And so we've had one, a few years ago, we had 2 nursing homes, one in the land where water's sweet and another where there's some carbon in a county there that has some carbon that went under. Caused some real problems. We was able to adjust in our long-term care providers. But this year, we also had another up in the basin where Bighorns are at that closed down. And part of that is the funding mix. If you have Medicare and Medicaid patients both, because Medicare is a higher reimbursement rate, they've been able to do that well. But if you lose that Medicare population and try to operate a long-term care facility based on the cost allocation just for Medicaid, it's difficult. And so this is one of the top priorities for the Department of Health, is to structure a reimbursement rate for our long-term care providers that would allow them to make sure that we didn't have any more closures. And so using that formula that they have, we put this in, and this amount will bring us up to 95% of the allowable costs based on that formula.
Follow up, please. So are we hearing that one of them closed because they lost Medicare patients, and then if we reinstitute funding that they'll reopen, or what are we doing? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that's really a good question, but what we're seeing around the state is that some of these long-term care facilities, which have been owned by hospitals or other care professionals, are being sold. The hospitals and the long-term care facilities sold, and the new owner is electing to make a change in that population mix, move the Medicare patients, which is someplace else, and leaving a facility perhaps with only Medicaid patients. And so it's, and then we have other parts of the state, particularly this direction, down in this part of the world, where there just isn't the number of Medicare patients in in a less populated county to provide that extra boost. And so they're largely serving their local county with Medicaid reimbursement. I don't know, I'm sure this hand waving helps everybody understand what I say a lot better, doesn't it? Yeah, I know. I don't know why I do that.
Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So to go back to the preschool ECA discussion, so I know the governor's rec was 1.9 million. Was that recommendation from the governor actually reflective of what Department of Health determined an inflation-adjusted cost for running those preschools were?
Vice Chairman Larson.
That was what they thought the ECA requirement for that previous year would have been. So he adopted not back 2 or 3 years. That's done on an annual basis. And so you go back and you have to pick maybe like 2017 or 2016, but maybe we missed 2018. But his recommendation was for the 2022 year. And then we went back and captured a couple of the previous year's ECAs that carry forward that had not been captured. Now, to the good minority floor leader's point, and it's there was some debate between the legislature, these folks that provide it, services, and the executive branch a number of years ago that, listen, once we say no, it's no. End of the ECA request, you can come back, but if we say no, just put it behind. We had a management council study or interim topic on that, and they came back with a conclusion that indeed, once the ECA was requested, that there was some obligation that it doesn't just evaporate into the wind, that it's going to stay in effect, and we have to, every time we consider an ECA, we have to consider all of those previous ECAs that were not adopted.
Are there further questions on Department of Health Budget, Agency 48? Seeing none at this time, we'll close Agency 48, move to Agency 49, the Department of Family Services. Please welcome back Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, folks, I'd move, let's look at Department of Family Services. That's Agency 049. It's found on page 10 of your summary sheet and 49 through 52 of your budget bill. On note one of the summary sheet and footnote 5 found on page 51 of the budget bill, we restored $2.7 million, which a little over 2 is general funds and about 600,000 are federal funds that were part of a step 2 reduction to local services to adolescents with behavioral needs. This includes our psychiatric regional treatment centers, our regional treatment centers, group homes, and crisis shelter beds. Notes 2 and 3 on the summary sheet require a little explanation. The St. Stephen's Indian School in Fremont County is a Bureau of Indian Education school, BIE, not a Wyoming public school. For several decades, the 2 tribes on the Wind River Reservation were allowed to have administrative jurisdiction over the school by the Bureau of Indian Education. They functioned like most public schools under this model in Wyoming, with a school board and the like, with funding for the school still coming from Bureau of Indian Education. In the early 2000s, the legislature started supplementing funds to the school to a level equivalent to the ADM funding of Wyoming public schools. So the Bureau of Indian Education was less than what we funded, and we made up the difference for those kids. But that funding had to be made annually through a appropriation to each of the tribes on a rotating basis and that was a contract between the Department of Education and the respective tribes, which then required the tribes to direct the funds to St. Stephen's, with agreements that the school would meet Wyoming public school requirements. Last year, with some unfortunate events with the administration of the school, the two tribes in a joint action turned their oversight of the school back to the Bureau of Indian Education. BIE isn't required to meet Wyoming graduation standards or even have teachers licensed to teach in Wyoming. They have some that are and some that aren't now that they've taken back over. As this transaction back to BIE school has taken place, the Department of Education has worked diligently to engage with the BIE to determine if they were interested to continue state funding, and to date have not received a request to have a conversation on supplemental funding. The standard budget appropriation to the Department of Education for the St. Stephen's School for the benefit of children on the reservation is not being used, and there's nothing to date that suggests that the Bureau of Indian Education is interested in having that conversation. The state helps fund, so the state also helps to fund child protective services on the reservation. The Department of Family Services administers those two contracts. There have been reductions to those budgets, so each tribe has its own Department of Family Services. Eastern Shoshone Tribe, Northern Arapaho Tribe, each have their own Department of Family Services. The state, through the State Department of Family Services, contracts with each of them to help provide some funding for protective services. There were reductions in some of that funding during those cuts. And so we're moving the St. Stephen's money from the Department of Education to the Department of Family Services with a similar intent to restore the reduction and address the needs of children on the reservation. Note 2, the summary sheet and footnote 6 of the budget bill move $2 million of the previously appropriated money in the Department of Education, Agency 206, to the DFS for Tribal Child Protective Services, which is provided through that contract between the tribes and the Department of Family Services. Note 3 in the summary sheet and footnote 7 of the budget bill, the JAC moves the remaining $1,050,000 to from the Department of Education in that same appropriation to Department of Family Services in their local services unit used to help adolescents and children with high behavioral needs, with half of that being dedicated and available to each of the tribal Department of Family Services with a 1-to-1 match. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions on that action.
Any questions on Agency 49, Department of Family Services? Seeing none, we'll close Department Agency 49 and move to Agency 51, the Livestock Board. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I would like to briefly revisit Agency 21, where I wanted to correct my earlier statement. Since I was last at the microphone, I've received word from the executive branch office that deals with the state budget, and which has informed me that the bank examiners will not get a double bump. They will get the higher of the two, but not a double bump. On to Agency 51, Livestock Board. This is quite simple. There's only one item. It's Governor's Letter number 11, in which the governor asked for an additional $500,000 for brucellosis testing. This will cover brucellosis testing not only in the designated surveillance area, but also in outside markets to reimburse producers, veterinarians, and markets for brucellosis testing. And I would stand for any questions.
Questions on Agency 51, Livestock Board? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 51 and open Agency 57, the Community College Commission. Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Community College Commission is found on page 11 of your summary sheet and on page 54 of the budget bill. The only thing we do here is we adopt in Note 1 the governor's rec to upgrade the commission's construction modeling software. You'll recall that we had a bill where we adjusted the amount that a college, before they're required to go before the commission. But in all of this construction, the commission and each of the colleges have a modeling software, and it's outdated. This is an upgrade, and it conforms each of the community colleges back to the commission. So happy to answer any question. And all but 15,000 of this is one time. The 15,000 is an ongoing maintenance agreement with the software company.
Questions on Agency 57? Seeing none, we'll close Community College Commission, open Agency 60, State Lands Investments. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Section 60, Office of State Land Investments, found on page 11 of your summary sheet and page 55 of your budget bill. The Office of State Lands and Investment is the administrative arm of the Board of Land Commissioners and the State Loan and Investment Board, often referred to as SLIB. The Office of State Land and Investment manages the state's subsurface and surface acres for the financial benefit of our K-12 system, the university, and the Veterans Home and State Hospital. It also administers various grant and loan applications offered to our cities, towns, counties, and special districts. If you look at footnote number 1 on your summary sheet, you'll see that we denied the governor's rec for 1 full-time policy and planning analyst position. In footnote number 2, we adopted the governor's rec for 2 full-time land management specialist positions in the grazing and agricultural leasing program to aid in renewals, competing bid scenarios, subleasing, improvement approvals, and enhanced leasing communication. So this should speed up those application processes for those who are grazing or have an agricultural lease. Footnote number 3, we adopted the governor's rec for 2 full-time positions, a geospatial technological analysis, wow, somebody bring me some coffee, please, and a data management analysis to support the comprehensive record application on its website that provides the public and users of state trust lands access to land ownership information, public access information, easements, land uses, such as for oil and gas or grazing or agricultural leases. So the idea is adding these positions will make it easier and quicker to update the information on this website so that we are more transparent to the public. Footnote number 4, we denied the governor's rec in his letter number 6 for $10 million and instead adopted $4 million to restore the mineral royalty grant program. So for those not familiar with this program, these are loans or grants available to cities and towns, counties, and special districts to alleviate emergency situations which pose a direct and immediate threat to health, safety, or welfare, to comply with federal or state mandates, or to provide an essential public service. And you will see an amendment coming. We're going to do some cleanup on that language. There was a prior appropriation to the Mineral Royalty Grant Program, and you'll hear us talk about that later. With that, I will stand for questions.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a holistic question, but some of these departments have had vacant positions for better part of last year. So they have an appropriation for wages for those positions that were never filled because they weren't able to hire them. So I was wondering what happens to those salary and wage benefits if they're not being utilized? Do they go back into the general fund or do they reside with the department? What happens to those funds for last year?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the question about what happens to funds when there's vacancies in any agency, not just the agency at the front today or right now, is all of those are part of reversions that will be seen at the end of the biennium. And so again, and we'll see it most years, there's an amount of money that is a Series 100 reversion back to the general fund.
Okay, Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, maybe I just missed it, but could you go over the footnote 4, the mineral royalty grants? If you did, could just briefly go over it again, and what the conversation and the reduction was about, as well as where are those grants going that they won't go to essentially with the $6 million reduction?
Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen, I apologize. I did not hear the last part of that question about who or, could you repeat that, please?
Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just curious on where the mineral royalty grants go to And if we're going to decrease it by $6 million, who loses, I guess, essentially?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The mineral royalty grants are a function that communities and municipalities are allowed to apply for, and they apply to that through OSLI to the State Board of Land Commissioners, who then make the determination of whether the proposal is a worthy endeavor and should be funded. So there really will be nobody that loses out on grant funding. There will just be less grant funding available for applicants to apply for. And this mineral royalty grant program has been seeing a decrease in funding from the legislature over the last several years, because many of the grants that were funded were very similar to grants being funded through the Wyoming Business Council. And so as this legislative body decided over time, due to that overlap, we chose to go with the Business Council type grants. We are starting to see a little different approach from that council. And so now we're, at least through the JAC action, encouraged by what the council is doing different. So we don't think there will be as much overlap between mineral royalty grants and BRC grants. And that's why we chose to put some funding back in, but not the chief executive's full request.
Okay. Any future other questions on Agency 60, State Lands Investments? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 60, open Agency 66, the Wyoming Tourism Board. Please welcome Chairman Nicholas to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would explain the JAC's action on Section 66, Wyoming Tourism Board. Very simple, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing that was brought to us was we adopted the governor's recs of giving $600 million of special revenue, so of tourism dollars, to the maintenance and operation of the Northeast and Southwest Welcoming Centers. And I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions? There is. Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little embarrassed to ask this. I've lived in Southwest Wyoming for decades. Where is that?
Chairman Nicholas, if you know.
Oh, it's up by Gillette, actually. No. So I believe it's just as you are leaving the state, is my recollection.
We'll certainly find that information for you. Bear River. I assume it's a rather large building, hopefully. All right, any further discussion or thoughts on Agency 66, the Wyoming Tourism Board? Seeing none, let's go close that and go to Agency 67, the University of Wyoming. Go Cowboys, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of Agency 67, the University of Wyoming, please refer to page 12 on your summary sheet and pages 60 through 68 in your budget bill. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $1.6 million for the Wyoming Ag Experiment Station Research and Extension Center inflation. The experiment stations have experienced an increase in the cost of items such as fertilizer, ag chemicals, seed, and fuel, just to name a few. And that is you can see that in summary note number 1. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $3.6 million for Science Initiative Program expansion. This will allow the university to expand the Wyoming Research Scholars Program, the Learning Actively Mentoring Program, the Competitive Research Innovation Program, and the Science Initiative K-12 Community Roadshow, as noted in summary note number 2. JAC denied the chief executive's recommendation for $2.5 million for campus security improvements, as noted in summary note 3. JAC denied the chief executive's recommendation and added, this is an item he had denied, and so we went the opposite direction in JC, and we added $500,000 and footnote number 11 for the College of Education initiatives. The funds will be used to draw attention to the career opportunities in education and the programs that are gateways to the teaching profession. That is in summary note number 4. JAC added $860,000 and footnote number 12, for the BSL-3 lab to increase employee compensation to as close to market as possible. That is summary note number 5. JAC denied the chief executive's recommendation, and this item he had denied, and so the JAC is approving the agency's request, and added $5 million for the Advanced Research Computing Center. This Advanced Research Computing Center provides centralized scientific computing resources, including high-performance computing and research storage. Summary note number 6. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $12,250,000 one time for the School of Energy Resources Carbon Engineering Research and Demonstration. And this is summary note side note number 11 of the 17 projects working here the side note to all of you. 11 of the 17 projects that they are working on are right here, the students are right here from Wyoming. That is summary note number 7. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation for $2.5 million one time for the UW Mowry Formation Research Project. The Mowry Formation in the Powder River Basin is one of Wyoming's largest, mostly undeveloped, unconventional oil plays. That is summary note number 8. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $5.5 million for Tier 1 engineering. The funds will be used to continue to educate and mentor students at the highest levels of advanced science and engineering. Summary note number 9 explains that. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $1.5 million one time for the School of Energy Resources for matching funds, and added the footnote number 13 specifying the matching requirements of being 1-to-1. These funds will be used to support philanthropic giving to the School of Energy Resources. That is seen in summary note 10. JAC added $2.5 million one time for the Endowment Challenge Fund to support the excellence in research, education, and extension in the College of Agriculture, and added footnote number 14 specifying the matching requirement of 1-to-1. Summary note number 11 explains that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would entertain any questions regarding Agency 67, the University of Wyoming.
Representative Chestick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about summary footnote number 7, the grant of $12.25 million general funds to the school, to SER. Can you give me examples of the carbon engineering research and demonstration projects that's going to be funding?
Representative Walters, if you know. He's going to find that, and while we do that, Chairman of Minerals, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the good member of Appropriations wants, I can answer that. Okay. May I, Mr. Chairman?
You certainly can.
Okay. To help out our good Appropriations Committee, that carbon research and facility is in the northern part of the state. It is kind of being built right now, and the federal government reduced that appropriation. They were going to contribute the $12.5 million, said no more carbon research, but it's a demonstration product on what's technically called pyrolysis. They'll be making things like, over here you have one of the bricks. They'll be making coal char bricks, they'll be making asphalt and some other things, and this is another great use for our coal reserves in Wyoming. Especially with the asphalt, if you've seen our Department of Transportation is using a lot of concrete. They can't buy asphalt right now. It's too expensive if they can get it. So that's what it is, a great research project, benefits a big portion of the northeast corner of the state.
Any follow-up questions on that? Representative Chairman Burkhart, more questions, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, now I have a question. I see that we continue with the NCAR MOU, and I know when that facility was built, we signed that MOU and we pay for usage on that computer. However, I've also heard that they've denied some of the researchers at UW use of that computer because they're doing research into fossil fuels. So are we continuing to participate with that limitation, or kind of what's the current status? Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're referring to summary note number 6, where $5 million was added for the Advanced Research Computing Center. This is not related to NCAR. This is the university's own internal high-end computing center. And so as to the university's relationship with NCAR, I'm not sure what that is at this time.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess the follow-up question to that would be, so are we going to use our own advanced system and drop that MOU with NCAR and save 1.5 million?
Representative Walters, if you would like to answer that, I thought it might be rhetorical, but maybe not. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was no discussion regarding the university's relationship with NCAR, so I'm unable to answer that at this point. The $5 million was, as I said, for the university's advanced computer system.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. The first is on line item number 5. It says JAC added $860,000 general fund footnote 2, and it mentions biosafety level 3 staff. So biosafety level 3 is potentially lethal infections. That's what biosafety level 3 is. So I didn't know we had that at the University of Wyoming. I was wondering if you could expound on that.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a lab that researches and tests for those sorts of disease issues, both human as well as livestock and wildlife. This lab has been in operation for several years, and unfortunately, the employees needed to staff that appropriately. The market for those is, the free market for those is paid at a lot higher value than the university is offering. And so what this footnote does is puts a little more money directed directly to those positions to get those positions up to a market rate. So we're able to hire some more of those employees, as well as bring the current employees up to market rate. But this is a lab that has been within the state of Wyoming for many years. It's certified by the federal certifying agencies as to its safety and conduct abilities, as well as everything else that's needed. It's really a great, tremendous asset for the state of Wyoming from the economic drivers for agriculture and things of that nature.
Representative Ward, follow-up, or second question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Walters. That's a good answer. Number 4, you said you rejected the governor's recommendation, but then added $500,000 for College of Education initiatives, and you mentioned that those are gateways to the teaching profession. Could you expound on that, please?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the agency had requested $1 million to go out and promote trying to get more teachers, more students and more individuals to come into the profession of teaching and receive a degree in teaching and education, because currently we have a tremendous shortage of teachers, not just in the state of Wyoming, but nationwide. And so the college and the university is trying, College of Education at the university is trying to come up with ways to get young folks, old folks, any folks to come into the profession of teaching. And so really I would summarize it down to the real simple thought of, think of it as an advertising campaign, but not just about becoming a teacher, but showing how there are other gateways of life experiences that can lead you into a career of teaching. So if you are, for example, a good welder, but nearing the end of maybe being an active welder, how would you convert those skills into becoming a welding teacher? Because there's the ability to do an activity versus the ability to teach someone else how to is something distinct. And so that's where the gateways into teaching professions comes in. But then just as a young person trying to recruit young people into the career field of teaching and educating. And so how do you become a good teacher, and what are those skills? And that's what the University of Wyoming College of Education works diligently towards providing.
All right, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a question earlier on another budget item dealing with raises for these state employees. So back on item number 5, that this also gives them a raise. Will they also be part of that, this raise plus if we appropriate a raise to state employees? Or is, I thought I heard somewhere once where the University of Wyoming, their employees were kind of separate and they deal with their own internal raises or salaries, that kind of thing. So just curious about that. Thanks.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you will see later in the day or possibly tomorrow in the Section 300s, there is a section that will recognize an enterprise-wide employee compensation plan. And the University of Wyoming will be a part of that employee-wide compensation plan. But the way it'll work is the university will get whatever that dollar amount is, and then the university and the Board of Trustees decides how to divvy up those funds. And so the university will have the ability to decide if they want to make what is called out in the proposed budget. The university could add on to that amount, or they could say that amount is adequate. The point of this calling it out is to make sure that the university does what we, the legislature, or we at least in the JAC, felt was necessary to fill those positions and adequately staff the BSL-3 lab. But again, how the university chooses to roll out the compensation plan will be a Board of Trustees university decision. It will just be based on a number or a dollar value that is part of that enterprise-wide system that is then delivered to the university.
Chairman Nicholas.
Second, and just to follow up on that particular issue. So the BSL lab is basically the vet lab that I think about 6 years ago, we put some substantial amount of money into it, upgrading it, bringing up the snuff, had to do some major remodeling. The problem is that they can't fill the positions because the current positions are on the university campus are frankly, they were underclassified. So they can't, and you got to have professionals and vets and the type of biochemistry folks to fill these positions, and they've been vacant for a long time. And so basically, the lab has been going unused and not to its full extent. And so we had the testimony came in, and actually we called them in and said, "What's going on with the bio lab? We want this thing. How do you fix it?" And they said, "We can't get applicants. We can't fill the positions. They're underfunded." So we said, "Fine, change it. Let's get the vet lab up and going. Tell us what they need to make, and let's start paying that much, and let's get this thing going." And so basically, this is our response to the universities not doing what we asked them to do over the past few years and saying, "Pay attention. We want you to fix this and get the vet lab up and running." Yeah.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, sorry, I know we're feeling like we're kind of beating a dead horse here, but I was wondering on line 6, where the governor denied the $5 million for the Advanced Research Computing Center. Was there a reason or logic that he gave for that denial?
Representative Walters, if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the budget notes, it notes that he felt that should be more adequately addressed during a budget session versus a supplemental session. The unfortunate side of that is these high-powered computers last 3 to 4 years, and we're coming up on its useful life here during the supplemental budget versus the full budget process. Is why JAC chose to go ahead and fund it now, is just because it is bumping up against the end of its strong useful life in terms of a high-capacity computer.
Any other questions on the University of Wyoming, Agency 67? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 67, move on to Agency 72, Wyoming Retirement System. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our explanation of the retirement system, Section 72, which is on page 69 of your budget, 13 of your summary sheet. Very simple, ladies and gentlemen. The JAC adopted the governor's rec of $116,000 to add one full-time equivalent position, which is an accountant position. Recall that the retirement fund basically funds their own, the special revenue that comes out of their revenues. And so the retirement fund, I think in the prior year, they had a total net return of about 22%. So they went from about an $8 billion fund to a $10 billion fund. So they're doing the job right. Unlike when I first came into the legislature, when they were on the lower quartile, they are now in the top quartile. In fact, last year they were on the top 5% of all similar funds. And so they said they need this position. We said, by golly, since you're doing the job right and you need an accountant, we'll give you one. So that's, happy to answer any questions.
Further discussion on Agency 72? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 72 and go to Agency 77, ETS. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Agency 77 is Enterprise Technology Services. That's the agency that deals with all the computers and computer systems. The governor's request was, which the Joint Appropriations Committee adopted, was $7.28 million general fund one time for cybersecurity. Of that, within that amount, $4.9 million will be for upgrading 88 applications to what's called TLS 1.3, or Transport Layer Security, which provides for secure encrypted communications between web browsers and the servers based upon a negotiated secret handshake. We could talk about that secret handshake, but then it wouldn't be secret. So that's what $4.9 million is. And then another $1.9 million is for what associated hardware tools and the architecture surrounding that to make all of that work. Essentially, this agency is very set on increasing our cybersecurity preparedness. The committee denied the governor's request for $509,000 for the Geographic Information Service portfolio mapping. The proposal was to migrate it essentially from the university to inside ETS, and the committee thought we should take a deep breath before we do that. So there's just some reluctance. We thought we should evaluate whether the geographic mapping, whether ETS is really the best place to put the geographic mapping system. There were two employee positions that were requested along with that, which the committee also denied. The upshot is that the net change of number of employees for this agency is 0. So thank you. I stand for questions.
Any questions on Agency 77, ETS? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 77 and open Agency 80, the Department of Corrections, also brought to you by the good Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Agency 80, Department of Corrections, the request there is for, it relates, we have on note 1, well, we'll start with the big picture. How much new money total would this agency be getting? And the answer to that is $6.14 million total when you add everything up. How many additional employees would they get? 0. And let's take those line item by line item. Number 1 was a request which the committee adopted of $1.6 million to implement some reforms we did with probation and parole incentives in 2019, commonly known as House Bill 53 from the 2019 session. And the whole idea behind that was we had consultants from the national organization that consults with state legislatures to say, look, you could make your probation and parole system both more effective to lower recidivism and make it cheaper at the same time. One of the things you can do, though, is you spend a little bit of money on so sort of what I think of as aftercare, that you let someone out on parole, you make sure that they get substance abuse treatment, things like that, lowers the recidivism rate. That's actually been working. Those funds, however, were cut during the pandemic. This would restore that. That's item 1. The item 2 is $380,000 for a Wyoming Correctional Information System replacement. Item 3 is similar to item 1. It's $2.3 million for the adult community corrections bed expansion. That is, if they can increase the number of beds they have, then you can get more people sort of out on parole, less expensive, and if you do it right, then your recidivism rate goes down. Line item 4, also related, $1.768 million for ACC funding contracts for the current contracts. They're the outside contractors who provide this service. They've been affected as the rest of the private sector with inflation increases. And I would stand for any questions.
Any questions on Agency 80, Department of Corrections? Hi, Representative Ottman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of information. When we're talking about recidivism and all those things and the programs that help, that's wonderful. I was just wondering, are they done there at the Department of Corrections? Because we have other agencies and different places that have been talking about recidivism and programs and all this stuff. And I was wondering if they work together, if they're separate, or if they need to be together. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that it's a combination of both, but I'll need to check on that to make sure. I know I'm pretty certain that there are third-party contractors involved, but some of it is self-performed by the agency. I'll try to get more specific information to you on that.
Or maybe right now, Chairman Nicholas.
Well, and the answer to that is at every facility, they have contract services or full-time employees, so everyone gets it in Riverton, in Lusk, in Torrington, and in Rollins. So and I might mention, because it's just worth repeating, that we had a new director come on board, and then when on the 2021 budget, he brought in reductions without really being asked of over $24 million in their overall budget. And it was an absolute breath of fresh air to have a new director come in and basically streamline and provide the same services. And so when he came back in and asking for an additional 6 to kind of fill out some of these programs, we're going, you betcha. We keep up the good work. So, thank you.
Further questions or discussion on Agency 80? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 80, Department of Corrections, and move to Agency 85, the Wyoming Business Council. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Section 85, the Wyoming Business Council. This is found on page 14 of your summary sheet and page 73 of your budget bill. This is our state economic development agency and leads economic growth to build our resilient communities and to create opportunities for Wyoming's people to thrive. The Business Council works with local economic development organizations, businesses, and communities to help entrepreneurs start and grow companies that create good paying jobs and opportunities for our young people. So you'll see here that the governor denied requests for 5 new positions in this agency. However, your JAC adopted 1 new position, a project manager, using general funds. This is seen in note number 1 on your summary sheet. This position would manage advanced, high-stakes initiatives that are designed to build local resiliency and capacity for economic development at the community level. So boots on the ground. The small agency currently has 39 full-time employees, so this would bring their total to 40. The next one, JAC adopted or approved the governor's requested $30 million of one-time funding for the Business Ready Community Grant Program. This is seen in note number 2 on your summary report. There is a high demand for the BRC program, especially from the emerging nuclear economy, trona and soda ash mining expansions, and the energy project developments. These grants are awarded to local governments who develop community-owned infrastructure that is then leased to private industry to support businesses in terms of recruitment or retention projects that again create new and good-paying jobs. The last item here, your JAC added, this is footnote number 4, found on page 74 of the budget, and note 3 on your summary sheet. We revived the community facilities program with $7.5 million in one-time funding. So 7.3 is in general funds and 104, I'm rounding, from the strategic investment and projects account. So this zeroes out that account to bring the total to 7.5 million for this program that assists cities, towns, counties, and joint powers boards in preserving former school and government facilities that can be reused as spaces for community gatherings and events, recreation, swimming, athletic facilities, especially for our youth. Applications are submitted to the Business Council with final approval from the State Land Investment Board. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Questions on Agency 85, Vice Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I get some more details on what the community facility program, what specific projects we're targeting with that $7.5 million? Do we know, or is it just a slush fund that when we put it out there, projects will show up?
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Heiner. So any of our communities are eligible for this. The footnote does not call out one specific project or community, but I'm sure we all have ideas of, how this might work. So again, eligible projects are the preservation of former school or government facilities that would have a community use. So I think we can all visualize, say, a former school building that the local population outgrew, and now it sits there empty. And then what do you do with it? I think it's great to think about how a community can reuse those spaces.
Further discussion on Agency 85, Wyoming Business Council. Seeing none, we'll close Agency 85 and move on to Agency 90, the Wyoming Energy Authority. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of Agency 90, the Wyoming Energy Authority, please refer to page 15 on your summary sheet, page 75 in your budget bill. Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming Energy Authority is the combination of what was the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority and the Wyoming Pipeline Authority. The legislature combined those two a couple years ago. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation for $175,000 for contract services to hire one additional staff member to assist with carbon capture utilization and storage, or CCUS, and work on other heritage mineral resources. That is in summary note number 1. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation for $335,000, of which $50,000 of that is one time for the Wyoming CO2 initiative. This request will provide technical support and information requests related to CO2 transmission, CO2 transmission pipelines, and future development. This is seen in summary note number 2. And Mr. Chairman, JAC added $500,000 and footnote number 1 for Wyoming mineral-related marketing or mineral market protection work. And that is seen in summary note number 3 or on page 15 of your, page 75 of your budget. And with that, Mr. Chairman, any questions on Agency 90, Wyoming Energy Authority?
Any further discussion? Madam Minority Caucus Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whip. I'm the whip.
Madam Minority Whip, welcome.
I just wanted to ask about the marketing in mineral. In previous years, I know we've sent some of those marketing materials out of state, so I'm wondering what that looks like specifically. Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In previous years, this was really based on coal marketing, and the committee felt that it was important to discuss coal, natural gas, oil, trona, and all of our wonderful minerals here in the state of Wyoming. And really, it's about marketing those, as we all know, the majority of which are consumed out of the state of Wyoming. And so it's really work in the states that utilize our mineral resources to try and ensure that policies set by those states don't have too significant of a negative impact on our mineral resources and our ability for those resources to be consumed in other states.
Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll close Agency 90, Wyoming Energy Authority, and open Section 101, Supreme Court. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Section 101, one of our other 3 pillars of our constitutional government. This is the Wyoming Supreme Court. Let's just go to the footnotes 1 and 2. Both of these are court-adopted recommendations. One is for audio and visual support specialist. The other is for a data trainer. Basically, over the past, we've been trying for 15 or 20 years to go to an e-file system, and they've finally gotten there. And it's a godsend if you're practicing law, but in order to do it, you've got to have the proper tech and visual audio components to it. And so as they migrated to that system, they need additional personnel to operate it. If you look at footnote number 3, the JAC denied the court's request for 1 full-time equal employee staff attorney. Then going to number 4, we adopted the court's rec for $30,000 for one time for commissioner member travel. The reason we've done that, this has to do with selecting new judicial candidates. They've already expended all of the funds, roughly over $30,000, so they need additional for new judges that will come on board or be reviewed by that commission in the next 15 months. JAC adopted the court's recommendation of $30,000 for an increase in housing allowance. That only applies to Teton County because of the cost of living in that particular county. That's set by the employee. It's an employee fund committee that I used to serve on, but they evaluate all and do regional cost adjustments where necessary. And so we're just adopting what they basically recommended. Then number 6, that's the JAC denied the court's request for $50,000 to basically to hire commissioners or magistrates for temporary basis to provide respite for the current judges. And then on number 7, the JAC added $877,000, and footnote number 5, this is a salary increase for your Supreme Court, District Court, and Circuit Court judges. It's a 6% increase to your Circuit Court judges and a 7% increase for both the District Court and Supreme Court judges. If you want to know those salaries, currently the Supreme Courts are getting $175,000 a year. This raises it to $184,000 for them. Your District Court judges are making $160,000 a year. This raises it to $171,000. Your Circuit Court judges are making $145,000 a year, and this raises it to $153,000. The reason we're doing this primarily is because, frankly, that we're getting fewer and fewer applications for all of these vacancies. And in the perspective of the bar, the candidates are not really the same candidates as they were in the past. And so we want to make sure that these are our best and our brightest, even though it's still under, significantly under what some attorneys make in some of the large communities particularly, but it's a step in the right direction. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, Mr. Chairman, the reasoning behind the 2 denials on footnote 3 and footnote 6. You noted them but didn't explain the reasoning behind them. And if we're trying to support our judges, I wanted to understand that better. Thank you.
Chairman Nicholas.
Certainly, I'd be happy to answer that. So frankly, the explanation was to basically help have a staff attorney interpret and translate federal compliance in terms of your ADA and those components. And our, if you take the number of staff they currently have on staff at the Wyoming Supreme Court, and once you answer those particular questions, our thought was that you don't need a full-time attorney to perform the duties that they were requesting. So we simply said, we don't think it's right at this time, and frankly also on appropriations, we go through it with a fine-tooth comb and we don't grant everything that everyone asks for. And the other one, I'm sorry, was which one?
Respite for judges, Chairman Nicholas.
Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Number 6, okay. So the number 6, the request we thought was, it didn't quite make sense. There wasn't a specific plan on how to do it, how you would implement it. And so, for example, it was for all 3 different levels of judges, and how you would allocate and who needed the respite the most. And frankly, $50,000 won't go very far. So if they want to do this particular function, we said, come back with a better plan, better ideas, and how it's going to be implemented.
Now, Chairman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on the housing allowance. Is that for the judges themselves, or is that for court employees? It would seem to me that all of our judges already own homes in that county. So is it the employees or the judges?
It's for court employees.
Court employees. Representative Storr, did you have another question? Nope. Any further discussion on Section 101 Supreme Court? Seeing none, we'll close Section 101. And open section 134, Judicial District 9B. Representative Nicholas.
Thank you,
Chairman
Mr.
Nicholas.
Chair. Thank you. And so I bring you Section 139, Judicial District 9. This is, the JAC adopted the court's rec of $25,000 in increase in housing allowance for District Judge 9B. So this is for particular staffing in the district court versus the circuit court that was the previous one. So I ask for your favorable consideration.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll close that section, open section 160, County and Prosecuting Attorneys. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to explain Section 160, County and Prosecuting Attorneys. This is on page 16, members, on your summary sheet, and page 80 of your budget bill. Mr. Chairman, note 1 there, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $467,000 general fund one time to reimburse statutorily required payments to the counties. These are for each of the counties that have an Office of County Attorney. For the new members, there are two counties in our state. We have 23. So the 2 counties that have a district attorney's office, that's Natrona County, District 1, and this county, Laramie, District 7. This is prorating the appropriation between the 21 counties, with county and prosecuting attorneys should request for reimbursement exceed the appropriated amount. Any remaining balance at the end of the biennium reverts to the general fund. Mr. Chairman, if there are no questions, that concludes the explanation on Section 160, County and Prosecuting Attorneys.
Any questions on section 160? Not seeing any, and seeing members of the Appropriation Committee packing up, I better be calling on the Majority Floor Leader about now. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Committee of the Whole begs leave to rise and sit again.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. That motion carries.
Messages from the Senate.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I think we have to rise out of Committee of the Whole before messages from the Senate.
That might be a good idea, thank you. Let me see. Let me get my script. The reading clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 1, beg leave to rise again, sit again. Representative Zwanitzer, Dan, Chairman.
Okay, now messages from the Senate.
Message 209. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange. Ayes 30, excused 1. Message 210. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 130, Educational Freedom Act. Ayes 23, noes 7, excused 1. Message 211. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions. Ayes 29, noes 1, excused 1. Message 212. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 178, Mountain Lion Pursuit Seasons. Ayes 25, noes 5, excused 1. Message 213. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate Joint Resolution 5, Air Force 75th Anniversary. Ayes 29, noes 1, excused 1. Message 214. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 92, Small Customer Electrical Generation. Ayes 18, noes 11, excused 1. Conflict 1. Message 215. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction. Ayes 18, noes 12, excused 1. Message 216. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures. Ayes 20, noes 10, excused 1. Message 217. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate Joint Resolution 2, recognizing the service of Lester C. Hunt. Ayes 20, noes 10, excused 1. Message 218. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate Joint Resolution 7, support for Taiwan. Ayes 29, noes 1, excused 1. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
So I think, in fact, I missed a script. So in accordance with Joint Rule 14-1, further committee of the whole action will be continued until the next legislative day. So reports from standing committees.
House Joint Resolution 12, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, Medicaid Federal Medical Assistance Percentage Increase. A joint resolution requesting Congress to increase Wyoming's federal Medicaid medical assistance percentage. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom is referred House Joint 12, Medicaid Federal Medical Assistance Percentage Increase. Respect the report, same back to the House with recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Swanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 103, sponsored by Representative Haroldson. Political party affiliation, declaration, and changes. An act relating to elections. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 103, Political Party Affiliation, Declaration, and Changes. Respect the report, same back to the House with the recommendation that do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Chadwick, Haroldson, Harshman, Knapp, Newsom, Olson, Ottman. Noes. Representative Yen. Representative Wiley, excused. Representative Olson, Chairman. House Bill 118, sponsored by Representative Newsom. Volunteer Firefighter Pension Funding, an act relating to the Volunteer Firefighter, EMT, and Search and Rescue Pension Account. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 118, Volunteer Firefighter Pension Funding. Respect the report, same back to the House with the recommendation that do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters. Noes. Representative Swanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 119, sponsored by Representative Penn. Medical prescriptions, off-label purposes. An act relating to professions and occupations. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 119, Medical Prescriptions, Off-Label Purposes. Respect the report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendment. Ayes. Representatives Klauston, Harnock, Penn, Trujillo, Ward, Zwanitzer. Noes. Representatives Chadwick, O'Hearn, Yin. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman. House Bill 151, sponsored by Representative Yin. Property tax exemption, child care facilities, an act relating to taxation and revenue. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 151, property tax exemption, child care facilities. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Allred, Andrew, Berger, Lawley, Northrup, Provenza. Noes, Representatives Brown, Houston, Obermueller. Representative Northrup, Chairman. House Bill 165, sponsored by Representative O'Hearn. Living Organ Donor Protection, an act relating to insurance. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 165, Living Organ Donor Protection, respectfully reports same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Chadwick, Klauston, Hornock, O'Hearn, Penn, Trujillo, Ward, Yin, Swanitzer. Representative Swanitzer, Chairman. House Bill 167, sponsored by Representative Henderson, Wyoming Teacher Shortage Loan Repayment Program, an act relating to education. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 167, Wyoming Teacher Shortage Loan Repayment Program, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Allred, Andrew, Berger, Brown, Klauston, Lawley, Northrup, Obermueller, Provenza. Representative Northrup, Chairman. House Bill 196, sponsored by Representative Henderson, Wyoming Infrastructure Protection Act, an act relating to trade and commerce. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 196, Wyoming Infrastructure Protection Act, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Swanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 201, sponsored by Representative Northrup, Hathaway Fallen First Responder Scholarship, an act relating to the Hathaway Scholarship Program. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 201, Hathaway Fallen First Responder Scholarship, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Allred, Andrew, Berger, Brown, Klauston, Lawley, Northrup, Obermueller, Provenza. Representative Northrup, Chairman. House Bill 207, sponsored by Representatives Swanitzer Dan. Change in party affiliation, an act relating to elections. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 207, Change in Party Affiliations, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Chadwick, Harshman, Newsom, Olson, Yin. Noes, Representatives Harrelson, Knapp, Ottman. Excused, Representative Wiley. Representative Olson, Chairman. House Bill 213, sponsored by Representative Burkhart, Energy Production Inventory Exemption, an act relating to ad valorem taxation. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 213, Energy Production Inventory Exemption, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Banks, Burkhart, Conrad, Heiner, Knapp, Larson, Lawley, Tarver, Western. Representative Burkhart, Chairman. House Bill 214, sponsored by Representative Andrew, General Regulatory Sandbox Program, an act relating to economic development. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom is referred House Bill 214, General Regulatory Sandbox Program, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Chestick, Crago, Haroldson, Jennings, Nemec, Oakley, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Washit. Representative Washit, Chairman.
Re-referrals, Chairman Northrup. House Bill 167.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to refer House Bill 167 to appropriations.
Seeing no objection, House Bill 167 is re-referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. House Bill 214, Chief, what committee? Chairman Washit, do you have a 214 bill that needs to go?
I did, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, at the lunch reading of the bills then. I asked there were 214 re-referral at that time.
Let's make sure that got. Chairman Washer, let's just do that again and then we'll know we got it done, if you don't mind. Thank you. Chairman Washer.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number one asked to re-refer House Bill 214 to committee number 2.
Seeing no objection, House Bill 214 is re-referred to committee number 2, Appropriations. That clears the deck, doesn't it, Chief? All right, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow, January 31st, 2023.
Committee announcements. Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 3 will meet tomorrow, Tuesday, January 31st at 8 a.m. in Capitol Extension Room East, number 3, to hear the following bills: House Bill 100, Acquisition Value Study; House Bill 287, Gaming Districts and Amendments; House Bill 114, Leasing and Sale of State Lands Amendments; House Bill 174, Homestead Exemption Amendments; HJ number 2, Constitutional Amendment, Residential Property Class; and House Bill 98, Property Tax Homeowners Exemption.
Chairman Newsom.
We're gonna see if this dandy thing works.
Doesn't.
Is it on? No?
Chairman Brown, do you have anything in the meantime?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to hear continuation of House Bill 156, voter identification limitations, then House Bill 229, electronic payment of sales and use taxes, and House Bill 154, permanent vehicle registration.
Chairman Eklund, do you have one, or Chairman Nicholas? Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 5 will meet tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock in our usual room, room 5, I believe, to finish testimony on House Bill 95, Working Animals Protection Act, and then we'll work that bill, and House Bill 188, Wolf Predation Compensation, House Bill 180, brucellosis testing, notification requirements, 175, excused absence state fair events, and House Bill 130, law enforcement canine detection grants, and all of this will be as time permits.
Vice Chair Western.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 6, Travel, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to consider the following bills: House Bill 171, Notice of State Land Leases and Local Opportunities; House Bill 200, Non-Resident Hunting License Application Fees; and House Bill 84, Regulation of Commercially Guided Boats.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House Appropriations will meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We'll hear those re-referrals so we can kick them out for those committees. We'll also then have House Bill 276 and Joint Resolution 6 and 7, continue work on that. Then on adjournment, we will do House Bill 88 and House Bill 116. 116. We probably won't have meetings on Wednesday, so the remainder of bills that we have, which includes 105, we'll be doing on Thursday.
Any other announcements? You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. The House is adjourned until tomorrow, 10 a.m., January 31st, 2023.